Overlord First Half Chapter 3, Pondering. Has something happened, Momonga-sama? The old man repeated his question. Momonga was dumbfounded and his thoughts were in disarray.
Well, it was good that he had returned, but it was still a completely confusing situation. No, nothing at all, nothing at all. His words "nothing at all" were repeated several times. They were NPCs, there was no need to act respectfully around them. While frantically being swallowed in his thoughts, excess panic and shock were forcefully suppressed. Nonetheless, it was important to collect information, even if it's just a little, and digest it. However, he had no good ideas. Inside Momonga's head was an image of a hamster running in a hamster wheel, and somehow he calmed down. More importantly, what should I do now? What do you mean? The GM call is not working. I am afraid I do not know about this GM call, but what would Momonga-sama like me to do? If Momonga-sama orders it, I shall immediately rectify it. They were having a conversation. When he noticed the truth, his body stiffened. Impossible. No, they were not alive. That situation could and would never happen. The NPCs were talking. No, the AI could also do that. However, it was impossible to have a conversation. There was no way that it could have a response for his every word. At first, he thought that they were moving based on their constructed programming. He wanted to confirm this and so started a conversation, but if it had come to this, then it was better not to have done anything. Now all of his thoughts were pessimistic. Momonga felt that something was out of place. It originated from him and the butler. To identify the origin of the feeling, Momonga closely inspected the butler. What is wrong? Have I done something to offend you? Ah. Momonga had identified the origin of the feeling and became speechless. His facial expressions were changing. His mouth was moving, and he could hear his words. Impossible. Momonga was panicking and placed his hand on his mouth. And then let out his voice. His mouth was moving. It was common sense in ADMMORPG that such a thing was impossible. The mouth moving to talk, that is. The expression on one's outer appearance was fixed. The only way to do it was to create a macro with specific expression tabs. By registering it, the appearance can change in accordance with the expression. You could make 5 patterns in which they could talk and of changing expressions. But it was difficult to make the words and the mouth movements match. Also, only the mouth could move, the face remained static and could not be changed. Assuming that the butler had such a macro, then what about Momonga himself? He did not have this. In addition, his movements seemed alive. Impossible. A long time had passed since he came and he could feel his common sense shattering. And at the same time, he suppressed an urge to yell. What should I do? What would be the best thing to do? It was a situation impossible to understand. Even if he got angry, no one could help him. The first thing he should do was information. Sabas. Yes. The butler, Sabas, lowered his head. Is giving orders fine? I don't know what's happening, but can I assume that all the NPCs in this tomb are loyal to me? Or is it only Sabas? Anyway, taking into account the others apart from Sabas, there was no one else he could send to go outside. Leave the Great Tomb, and examine the surroundings. If you encounter any intelligent beings, invite them back here. Comply with the demands of the other party if needed. The search radius is 1 kilometer. Avoid combat if possible. Understood, Momonga-sama. Is it possible to leave the Great Tomb? Momonga mumbled in his heart. More importantly, understanding the current situation was a priority. Take one of the maids with you. If you get into a fight, immediately retreat with the information. It shall be done. That's one objective down. Now, what should I do next? While gaining knowledge was indispensable, there were other necessary things apart from that. Momonga let go of the staff of Einzulgon. The staff did not fall down. In fact, it hovered in the air as if it was waiting for someone to pick it up. It was a spectacle that completely ignored the laws of physics. To Momonga, however, it wasn't surprising. In Yggdrasil, even low-quality items had this effect. Sometimes, anguished faces of humans appeared in the ever-changing aura, the pitiful remnants of which Momonga collected in his hands and ignored. He was used to it, or not. However, even with those macros, Momonga had a wry smile on his face. He then snapped his fingers and drove those thoughts away. Momonga collected his thoughts and pondered. The next thing was contacting. Whatever was the case, it was important to contact the GM. The person who would know the most about what had happened would be the GM. How should he contact them? Originally, you could shout or use a GM call and immediately contact a GM. However, both were currently unusable. Other functions. A spark of inspiration appeared in Momonga's mind. Message? It was magic that allowed one to contact others. Originally it could only be used under special situations or in specific locations, even now it probably could not be used. However, it was a magic that allowed you to contact other players, so he was not too sure if it could be used to contact the GMs. But could magic be used in this situation as normal? Anyway, it was important to confirm this fact. Momonga was a magic caster. If he could not use magic, his battle abilities were chopped down to a one-third of his original. Although the current situation was unclear, it was of utmost importance to check if magic could be used. If that was the case, then a wide area would be needed. There was one place that could suit his needs. Once there, he could investigate various things. There was one more thing. It was to confirm something similar to his own power. It was to confirm his own authority. Whether or not the authority of the Guildmaster of Ainzulgoen was maintained. All the NPCs he had met up until now had loyalty towards him. However, there were 5 other existences in the great underground tomb of Nazarick that could rival him. He had to confirm their loyalty. Firstly was to check if the Legiumton's golems only listened to his orders to secure a safe place. Then he had to check the loyalty of other strong NPCs. But if that was the case, Momonga looked down upon the kneeling figures of Sabos and the maids. Was their loyalty still unshakable? If the boss did stupid actions, his subordinates would immediately lose confidence in them. This would probably stay true here. Or maybe if he re-entered their loyalty, they would not betray him. If their loyalty had changed, what should he do to reclaim it? Maybe rewards? There were a lot of valuable treasures located inside the treasury. He should still have quite a bit of Yggdrasil currency. Of course, he was not sure about their salary. Or maybe the superiority of their ruler. However, he was not sure what would constitute as superiority. Maybe assisting in the improvement of the dungeon. Or maybe power? The staff of Ainzulgoen flew into Momonga's open left hand. Overwhelming strength? The 7 gems embedded in the staff began glittering. They appeared to be about to use powerful magic. Well, I'll consider it later. He let go of the staff. It floated around as if sulking and fell to the floor. Anyway, he had to act like a ruler. There was no hostility currently raised against him. Not letting your weak parts be visible was a common action of humans. Momonga stood up from the throne and raised his voice. Excluding the maid following Sabos, contact the floor guardians. Inform them to come here. No, the 6th floor, the amphitheater. The reporting time is 1 hour from now. Afterward, go to the 9th floor and guard it. There is no need to contact Tora, I will do it myself. Yes. While the maids lowered their heads, only one did not do so. Before he arrived at the throne room, it was the first maid that he met. He remembered that the housemaids had a level of 1. They had no fighting strength. Ah, you. Master, what should I do? You will stay here. I will give you your instructions later. Now go. Sabos and the battle maids rose as one and walked out. He watched them go out and picked up the fallen staff and descended down the stairs. And then he stood in front of the kneeling maid. He felt the gaze of the maid in his direction. Stand. Yes. The maid timidly stood up and extended her hand. It was a thin hand. And when he took it. The maid made a face as if she was in pain. Momonga panicked and instantly let go. Exactly what just happened? It was worse than a feeling of disgust. After thinking about all the possibilities, he arrived at the answer. The prerequisite of being an overlord was to be a lich. As liches leveled up, they gained a skill when they touched someone, they dealt the person negative energy damage. It was probably that. But there was an obvious problem. In Yggdrasil, the monsters and NPCs in the great underground tomb of Nazarick were affiliated with Ainzulgoen. Whenever those within the same guild tried to deal damage to one another, they would not receive damage from friendly fire. Were they not affiliated with the guild? Or possibly, friendly fire was now possible? The chance of that was high. Momonga thought so. Then, how should he temporarily stop an ability that was always active? Pondering. Momonga suddenly thought of a way to stop it. Explaining how to do it was close to impossible. This was part of an obvious action. He raised his hands as if grabbing a cup in front of him. He could not explain why he had to do this. His order came from his brain and was transmitted by his nervous system, he could not explain it. This method would also probably stop negative energy damage. His order was transmitted from his brain by his nervous system. That was probably it. An overlord had control over several abilities. To Momonga, doing this was as simple as breathing to a human. Phew. Unknowingly, being stuck in another world, Momonga could do nothing but laugh. If this strange situation continued, he would never stop being surprised. Being used to something is truly terrifying. I am going to touch you. Ah. Stretching out his hand, he touched the maid's thin hand. He wanted to feel her pulse. It was there. It was beating. It was natural for a living creature to have it. Of course, if it was a living creature. He let go and looked down at his own palm. It was bone. With a little bit of skin. He could not feel his pulse. Yes, the Overlord was an undead. An existence beyond death. There was no way he had one. His gaze left it and headed towards the maid. Returning it, the maid got flustered and hesitantly lowered her gaze. What is this? This was an NPC, was not it just data? But it seemed to be alive. What sort of AI could make this possible? It really seemed as if this world was real. Thinking that, Momonga believed it was impossible. There was no way this fantasy could exist. However, he thought of it, he could not simply let the idea go. Raise your skirt. Eh? The atmosphere froze. She looked as if she could not understand what he was saying. It was natural. Who would make that sort of order? She was tormented by her shyness and seemed to need it repeated. Momonga steeled himself and opened his mouth again. Raise your skirt. Eh? What is wrong? But, that's... The maid seemed as if ready to cry. She was not data, she had emotions, a human. Momonga felt that he was doing something demonic, and felt crushed by the weight of his guilt. But, this was necessary. His words even made himself feel frantic though. It is an order. I understand. The maid trembled and raised her skirt. She looked like a frightened small animal. Momonga felt a sadistic pleasure and felt disgusted with himself, but he stiffened it. He had no intention to act on it. Snow White. Those words floated about in his head. Momonga averted his gaze and began looking around at the surroundings. There was no change. Why was there no side effects caused by this behavior? Was he allowed to go that far? Momonga hesitated and decided to stop. Tears were collecting in the maid's eye. You can lower it now. Dash. The skirt was lowered vigorously. Momonga had two possible reasons for the current situation. One was that this was a new MMORPG basically, after Yggdrasil had ended, Yggdrasil 2 had started immediately after. However, after this, the chance of that being true got extremely small. Yggdrasil had a ban on 18+ actions such as touching. Even 15+ actions were restricted. A violation would result in the violator's name being exhibited on the company homepage and his/her account would be shut down. There was a possibility that he who had just performed an 18+ action would be recorded on the log and legal action would be taken against him. If this was the game's, Yggdrasil's world, such actions would be impossible to do and measures would be taken. Firstly, if the company had seen this, they would have stopped him. However, that did not happen. In addition was the MMORPG laws. Without getting the consent of the user, forcing them to play the game was considered as kidnapping. If they were forcing players to play the game, then they would immediately be reported. It would not be strange for them to be taken to prison if players could not log out. In addition, it was mandated to record a week's worth of events onto the console, causing the developers to be easily caught. If Momonga did not come to the company, someone would come looking for him, and the console would be handed over to the police. Would they even do such a criminal act if there was evidence available? While it was true that if this was Yggdrasil 2 or a patch it would be a gray area, there were no merits for the company in doing such a dangerous thing. If that was the case, then the current situation was not a product of the game company. He could not think of any other possibility. Even if he changed his way of thinking, he could not think of any other possibility. The problem was that everything was unclear. But there was one other possibility left. The possibility that the game had turned into reality. Impossible. Momonga believed so. It was absurd, and irrational and could not possibly exist. However, the longer he thought about it, the more it seemed that it was true. And then. I am sorry. Momonga lowered his head. This was a human. What exactly happened he did not have a clue, but he understood one thing. The NPCs had emotions. You could say that she was very similar to a human. Or maybe, she was a human. No. Momonga-sama must have had his reasons. Sob. The tears were falling. It was natural. If he himself received this sort of order, he would probably do something similar. Momonga collapsed in his self-loathing. But, how should he stop her tears? He could act like his old superiors and he would be able to desperately apologize. He even felt that prostrating himself would be appropriate. But he could not do that. Until he fully understood his own position, he could not show anyone weakness. When he lowered his head earlier, the maid made a slight commotion. Anything more would be bad. Don't cry. You can go. Yes. The maid lowered her head and her footsteps slowly left the room. While watching her figure, Momonga breathed a tired sigh. Overlord First Half Chapter 4, The Arena. The Ring of Einzulgon. It was a ring on Momonga's right ring finger, a magic item that all members of Einzulgon owned. The ring did not have any strong abilities. Out of all Momonga's other equipped rings, it was extremely weak. When compared to a ring that would allow you to revive at the base when the player dies instantaneously without penalty, it was lacking. However, as for why he was wearing it, under certain conditions, it was the most frequently used of the group. It had the ability to transport the user anywhere with the Great Underground Tomb of Nezarec. Apart from certain areas, other convenient transport magic would be obstructed within the Great Underground Tomb. The only place you could not access using it was the throne room. In addition, you could not enter the treasury without the ring. After confirming that he had control over the Lemageddon golems, he readied himself and activated an item. The world blacked out for a moment and the scenery changed. It seemed that the item usage check was a success. He was used to it as he saw it often enough in Yggdrasil. The place Momonga teleported to was a gloomy passageway. Just in front of him was a closed lattice door. From there, a white light shone through. Momonga walked through the wide and tall passageway. The passageway was lined with torches, causing shadows to dance around the walls. As he approached the lattice door, it raised itself upwards. Momonga passed through it and reflected in his vision was an area with spectator seats several stories tall but empty in the center. This was the Colosseum. 188 meters long, 156 meters wide and 48 meters tall, it was based on the Roman Empire. There were countless guests sitting at their seats, but they were not moving. The magic continual light was cast at various locations that lit up the surroundings with a white light. It brightened the area like it was midday. The name of this place was the Amphitheater. The performers were the intruders, the audience were golems, and those sitting at the VIP box were Einzulgon members. Naturally, the play was a slaughter. Actually, apart from the attack from the 1,500 people alliance, this was the final area that the intruders had reached. While heading towards the center, Momonga looked up at the sky. A black night sky stared back down at him. Of course, you could change it according to the time of day, but it was a fake sky. In addition, Momonga's outer appearance was different from what he was inside, a human. Nonetheless, he could not let the time pass without doing anything. Next, Momonga thought about what to do and looked at his surroundings, and then at the VIP box. Toa. In response to his gaze, a shadow said something and jumped from the VIP box. The shadow that jumped from a structure about the height of a 6-story building, spun around in midair as if it had wings and landed softly on the ground. That was not by the usage of magic. It was simple pure physical skill. The shadow completely absorbed the impact of the jump with just its legs, and showed a prideful expression. Pui. Both of her hands made a victory sign. The person that jumped down was a young girl. She looked about 10 years old. Just like the sun, those words fit her cute smiling face perfectly. Hair like golden silk that went up to her shoulders, glittered as if bathed in sunlight. Her heterochromatic gold and purple eyes shined like a puppy. Her ears were long and pointed and she had blackish skin. She was a close relative of the elf, a dark elf. On top of her skin armor was a lightweight armor made of jet black and crimson dragon scales. On top of that was a white vest with golden embroidery. At her chest was an Einzulgon guild emblem. At her hip and right shoulder was a whip and on her back was a large bow. The handle, rim and grip were all decorated. The young girl was the guardian of the 6th floor of the Great Tomb of Nezarec. The beast tamer that can control mythological and magical beasts, Ordibe Fiora. She closed the distance to Momonga with quick and small steps. Although they were small, her speed was that of a running beast. The distance between the two closed in an instant. She braked hard with her feet. Her shoes were plated with mithril and made a zaw-zaw-zaw sound as they kicked up dust. Momonga reckoned that the cloud would not reach him and he admired the scene. Phew. Although she was not perspiring, she acted as she was and wiped her forehead. She smiled just like a puppy. "Welcome Momonga-sama. Thank you for coming all the way to my floor." Her face was a smile and he could not feel any hostility. Sense enemy also had no response. Momonga let his gaze leave the band around his right wrist, and removed the power collecting in the staff in his hand. If he had gotten into a fight, he planned to retreat immediately, but it seemed that it was not necessary. "You seem healthy." "I am healthy. But, I have had too much free time on my hands. It has been a long time since we had any intruders." Momonga slightly narrowed his eyes in front of the laughing aura. When the 1,500 people alliance came, they had invaded until the 8th floor. Basically all of the floor guardians died. What happened to their memories of that time? While he could believe that she was not scared of death, he wondered what she thought about it. Yggdrasil simply caused you to level down whenever you died. While it was the game setting to have you forfeit your levels, the current him would definitely feel a loss. But, if the player character was level 10 or below, the level down did not occur, which was different from the beta test, where you simply died. In addition, using the magic resurrection and raise dead would cause a decrease in level. Also, using expensive cash items could reduce the level down penalty. It was even simpler for NPCs. The guild just had to pay for their revival and their level would not be affected. This way, the level down gave players who loved to rebuild their character a way to do so. While it was true that if this was a game which relied heavily on experience, going down one level would be an extreme penalty. However, in Yggdrasil until the latter half of 90 levels it took a short time. And for that reason it was not that terrible to lose levels. This was not fearing the level down, causing the barbaric land to not be reclaimed. If you had bravery, you could awaken the engineering side in you. But, if this world was real, if they died, it would be the end. Was the aura here different from the aura that died in the battle, or was she revived afterwards? He wanted to confirm it. There was no need to beat around the bush. Aura had no hostility, and he wanted to conduct an experiment. More importantly, she was a NPC creation of a member of Einzulgone. It would be good if he could hear all of her problems. Also, there was a chance that death in this situation and in the past could be completely different. This way to verify the facts was good. He could not confirm others, so he left them for later. Firstly was to check the degree of how much the program froze. In the end, the Yggdrasil that Momonga knew, how much has it changed in the current situation? It was important to find out. A break because there are no intruders? Ah, no. It's... No, I am not scolding you. I want you to answer me truthfully. Yes, a bit of free time. There is no one here who can last for more than 5 minutes in a fight with me. While playing with her fingers, Aura looked upwards and replied. As a guardian, Aura was naturally at level 100. There were not many in the dungeon that could rival her. If so, then I do not mind if you fool around for a bit. Uwa? Momonga-sama, I am the guardian of this floor. I properly guard it, I cannot fool around. While swelling her cheeks, she took an angry pose. Her expressions really were changing. I see, then what about making a farm in the jungle? You could rear man-eating plant monsters there. No, I do not have any pets that can do that. Each of the floors in the great underground tomb of Nazarick had its own characteristics. In the middle was the 5th floor, a jungle. It was a huge area that could rival the Haneda airport. It was the largest part of the dungeon. In addition, I want to properly guard this place. I am happy that you are properly doing your job, but you can also go down, you know. It cannot be helped if the guys below get more time off, right? Well, there's that too. Aura sighed with a ha. Accompanying it, a sweet smell began to permeate through the surroundings. Momonga remembered her ability and took a step back. Ah, sorry, Momonga-sama. Aura noticed it and began to wipe the air away with a pada-pada sound. Aura's breath had the ability to change feelings and thoughts. Her breath was dispersed into the surroundings with a radius of several meters. Depending on the situation it could go to tens of meters. This way, she could control her beasts and send disadvantageous effects to the enemy. It's fine now. I stopped it. I see. But Momonga-sama is an undead, you should not be affected by status changes, right? It really was like in Yggdrasil. Undead could not be affected by any status changes, whether good or bad. Am I in your area of effect? A. Aura thought he was scolding her and shrunk away in fear. I am not angry, am I inside? Yes. What sort of effect is it? Fear. Fumu. He could not feel anything like fear. Momonga was wearing magic items for the sake of being unaffected by status changes. He removed any resistance holding equipment on his hand. Basically, he was seeing the basic resistances of the Yggdrasil system. He was checking the effects of the status changing effects. Could you try other effects? Eh? It was a voice of a puppy that was being scolded. Without thinking, Momonga began caressing her head. It felt like he was touching silk. Every time her head was rubbed, her expression was ecstatic. I have something to request. I want to run several tests and I need your strength. Yes, I understand. Momonga-sama, please leave it to me. He stopped Tora, who was about to roll up her sleeves. But before that, he gripped the staff. It was the same as earlier. It was the same as when he used the ring's power. He collected power in the staff. Momonga commanded power into the staff. He was using just one of the gems embedded in the staff. He used a small fraction of its power. Summon Moon Wolf. Using a summoning magic, 3 beasts appeared from the air. They were Siberian wolves that were releasing a dim silver light. Summoning monsters using magic had the same effect as in Yggdrasil. This was why he did not act surprised. This wolf was transportation speed was not complete. It was an essential member of a surprise attack, a level 20 class monster. It did not have any particularly strong abilities, but it was suitable for his current objective. On the contrary, it needed to be weak. A moonwolf? Yes. Add it into the effect range. Eh? Is it okay? I do not mind. He was overbearingly pushing forward with the uncomprehending aura. If he could not enter the area of effect, he would not be able to guarantee the accuracy of the results of this test. This problem of this test was that Aura's ability would not start up. To avoid that, he used a third party to at the same time receive the effect. For that purpose he used a moon wolf. Aura released her breath into the air. Momonga did not feel that he received any changes. Midway, he turned around and relaxed as there were no effects whatsoever. The moon wolf, which was also within the range, was affected, as there was no way that Aura's ability would not work on it. Anyhow, it seemed that Momonga did not receive any status changes. That was basically due to Yggdrasil had its special rules for when heteromorphic races summon monsters, and would gain abilities much like that of monsters. The monster abilities Momonga had as an overlord were high-class undead creation /8 per day, low-class undead creation /12 per day, negative energy touch, desperation aura, cold, acid, electric immunity, high-class, damage immunity, high-class, magic resistance, wave of death, impure protection, high-class, retreating resistance, physical damage, reduction in strength and magic. Also, he had his class levels as well. For example, Momonga had his Master of Death instant death strengthening magic, his True Necromancer's Undead Ruler and Undead strengthening skill. Undead had special base abilities. Immunity to critical hits, immune to status change, food and drink unnecessary, poison, sickness, sleep, paralysis, instant death immunity. Death magic strengthening, oxygen unnecessary. Ability cost damage immunity, energy drain immunity, recovery with negative energy, night vision. And there was more. Of course, he had weaknesses. Frailness against light or holy damage, fire damage increase. Naturally, he could remove these with items. These were the basic abilities of being an undead. He could also gain them from leveling up as well. This was quite useful information. My thanks. Yes, it was not much of a job though. Return. The figure of the 3 moon wolves disappeared similar to how they first appeared. Long ago, I thought that Aura's abilities did not affect those from the same guild. Eh? Watching Aura's surprised face, Momonga understood that it was not the case. Was I wrong? Yes. I can only change the area of effect at will. You have probably gotten it confused with that. Friendly fire was now permitted. He could not let this become a painful experience in which he could the way area of effect magic worked. Momonga mumbled to himself and thought about it. The quiet Aura was fretting and eventually opened her mouth. Why did Momonga-sama come to my floor for? Ah, yes, no, it's different. I came today for training. Training? Aura's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. What was a magic caster of the highest class, the leader of the great underground tomb of Nazarick and Aura's master saying? Momonga got that feeling. Yes. At Momonga's reply, he lightly hit the floor with the staff, and Aura understood. Momonga felt happy that everything went according to plan. Understood. That staff of legends? Is it really okay for me to see it? Ah, I do not mind. However, you can only sit and watch, then you can observe the power of the strongest magic. Aura became happy. What sort of powers did a legendary staff have? Momonga posed the question to himself. If there was a difference in perspective, it could become troublesome. He had to be careful to not make any problems. One more thing, Aura. I have summoned all of the Guardians to assemble here in an hour. Eh? Then I have to make preparations too. No, there is no need. Just wait here until they arrive. Really? All of the Guardians? Then is that girl is coming too? All the Guardians. Ha. Aura took a deep breath and sighed. It seemed that they did not have a good relationship. What exactly happened? It looked like there would be many more difficulties to come. Momonga muttered under his breath. Overlord First Half Chapter 5, Magic. Magic casters, to say in the least, are extremely bothersome. It was a class where you had to plan extensively into the future, which is what some Yggdrasil players said. Firstly, magic in Yggdrasil had a ridiculously large number of spells that could not be changed or made by the creator tools. There were 3,000 of them. Of course, it was impossible to use all of them. They were separated into 4 types. Those that call upon God's miracles are the clerics and priests, placing a heavy emphasis on their faith stat, magician, wizard, and secret arts user, arcaner. Prioritizing on their magic power stat, the talismancer and the miko. They placed heavy emphasis on their mental strength stat. Lastly were those that placed heavy emphasis on other stats. For each class, different spell lists were available. A wizard could use Tier 1 spells of a certain type and could go up to Tier 2. However, arcaners could use Tier 1 of this type but could not go up to Tier 2. This way, when the players level up along with their chosen class, they can choose 3 new spells from the class's spell list. Hence, level 100 players could use 300 different spells. However, this has been counted as a separate system and the stacking of classes are different from the level of magic one can use. And for that reason level 100 characters who had Bad Faith series classes and could use only up to the 4th tier of magic when they could have gotten up to the 6th tier. Simply put, having a level 60 wizard and a level 40 cleric would not let you use the highest 10th tier magic of the Faith series. And the most number of spells the highest level 100s could learn was 300. Whether this was few or many, magic casters could only accept it. But it was extremely few. At least, when compared to the total number of spells that could be learned. Firstly, in order to learn magic, you must first fulfill the prerequisites. Selected classes, special events, using certain items, etc. and then, being able to use the selected magic type. Similarly to how one learns a language, you need to learn the prerequisite magic. And for that purpose, there were players who devoted 1/3 of their total magic to the prerequisites, and there were players who tended to give up learning as they could not clear the prerequisites. In addition, and for those who were becoming specialists, there was a problem about what to choose. It was extremely common that the magic that they wanted to learn was not within their field. It was not rare to die and recreate one's classes. Also there was the tricky problem of handling the stats. For example, the magic, Fireball. Its attribute was considered magic. So, if your magic power was high, you could perhaps deal more damage with it or maybe your range would increase when compared to other high-leveled players. Let us assume that a player who specializes in the Faith series cast Fireball. Their spell would not be as strong as other classes which focused on magic power. Then what would happen when such a class cast Fireball? The damage and distance would be inferior to those that focused on magic power. This was the decision tormenting the minds of Yggdrasil players. If the magic casters were just planning to fulfill a certain objective, then 300 was a sufficiently large number. There were magic casters who wanted to just fight monsters. Many ordinary DMMORPG players chose to specialize in using buffs and attacking. Solely dealing damage to the enemy was the way to go. Magic casters were also looking for a way to handle multiple scenarios. If you were hoping to simply destroy strong monsters with overwhelming strength, then you could not do that. However, Due to the overwhelmingly large number of spells that you can learn when compared to normal Dmorps, unlike regular Dmorps that only have magic for battle, there is magic that can be used for a variety of situations. For example, metal detection magic from the lower to the higher tiers existed. It could also refine and purify it. Magic that let you peer into the ground, and magic that let you turn dirt into low-ranked metals. There was countless transportation magic. Long-range transportation with a chance of missing, long-range transportation with no chance of missing, transportation which caused a flashy effect for no meaning whatsoever, transportation that swapped the position of two objects, transportation that gathered all the party members, transportation that brought you to the closest town, short-ranged transportation that could be cast for an unlimited number of times within a certain time period. There were many others. Another would be sensory magic, sensing of nearby enemies, detection of enemies who had erased their presence, sensing of the enemy's magic casts, knowledge of special items, sensing of opposing magic. There was countless magic that gave you sensory abilities. By using one's head to cast the attack magic, there were countless magic that made it easy to change the flow of a battle. For that purpose, learning 300 individual magic, if you thought about dangerous situations, you could not feel that it was a lot. In fact, you would feel that it was too few. In addition, in order to make the choice of choosing your magic rare, when you leveled up and chose your magic, even though you chose it, you could not cast it that often. Also, there was a large amount of data on the Yggdrasil wiki that was also easy to understand. Momonga, thanks to his cache items, had learned 100 more spells. In addition, due to his repeated PK's player killer, and participating in special events, another 318 more. In total, he had learned 718 spells. Instead of simple destruction spells, he had a specialization in binding magic and death magic. In addition, he chose a class that matched them, boosting the abilities. And for that reason, he would lose to a battle-focused magic caster in terms of damage, and the destruction level was also a problem. Conversely, investigation and searching magic were very important, but there were few of those, so it could not be compared. Momonga slowly pointed his finger towards the scarecrow that was set up in the middle of the arena. Momonga's many death magic spells did not have much of an effect on non-living organisms. A simple explosion spell would be best here. He sent a sidelong glance towards Aura. Her eyes were sparkling with curiosity. On her two sides were huge monsters. Their giant bodies over 3 meters tall reminded one of an inverted triangle. A skeletal structure that appeared to be the mix of human and dragon, with thick and sinewy meat covered it. Covering that was a set of scales that were harder than steel. In addition, a dragon's face and a tail that made you think of a tree. While it had no wings, it looked similar to a dragon standing upright. Dragonkin, they were monsters with the title, close relatives of dragons. With arms thicker than a man's torso, and a length that was half of its body, it was holding a weapon that could have been a sword or a shield. Sacrificing her own battle power, she gained the highest position as a beast tamer. With her servants, her battle abilities would go up to 2.25 of their original. She had 100 of them. And the two at her side were cleaners of this amphitheater. Phew. Momonga breathed softly. If she was that excited about it, it would be difficult. The current goal was to confirm if he could successfully use magic. The reason why he let Aura attend this experiment was so that before the other guardians came, he would let her know that having him as an enemy would be a bad idea. Currently, he did not see any intention of betrayal. If Momonga lost his magic, he was not sure if he could keep their loyalty, he could just not believe it. While it seemed that Aura had no such intentions, this was the first time he met an equal. While it was true that her character was created by collecting ideas from everyone in the guild. However, having this intelligent existence, she must have other sides to her apart from what was imputed. With this side to her would cause her to tire of a weak ruler. If it would not, then everything was fine. But if she would try to stand on top of a ruler that showed weakness, there was no need to think any further, but it would be a foolish decision to simply trust her. Look before you leap. Under this situation, this was Momonga's natural thought process. Could he actually cast magic? It was important that he alone affirmed the results of that experiment. If he could not cast magic, he had to act casual and ask someone. If he really could not use magic, there was a chance that he simply could not understand how to use it. Aura did not know a lot of magic, but she could use magic of the highest tier. If there was a problem, maybe he could ask her. Temporarily, it was fine even if he could not cast magic. As for why, it was because he came to check the power of the staff. Since he came to check the magic item, He had several excuses that he could use. Momonga memorized 718 magic spells. Which would be the most suitable one here? Firstly, area of effect magic could not be used due to friendly fire. If that was the case, it would be great if it was the same as in Yggdrasil where you clicked icons. But currently there was none, something else had to be done instead. He had a grasp of it. The ability was embedded in himself. It was the same as isolating your senses and focusing your consciousness. It was like the icon was floating in the air. Momonga laughed. Fireball. A ball of fire swelled up from Momonga's finger and was released. It hit the scarecrow without a single error. The ball formed by the flame burst apart upon impact, releasing the heat that was trapped inside. The resulting flames licked the surrounding areas of the tomb. All of that in a single moment. Nothing was left. Only the charcoaled remains of a human scarecrow. Foo. Question mark. Aura sent a strange glance at Momonga, who was suppressing a laugh. Aura. Another scarecrow. Ah, yes, right away. Wait. The dragonkin replaced it with another scarecrow. At the same time, he cast his magic. Explode. Its top half burst apart and danced in the surroundings. The head that was blown off landed directly on the body of the dragonkin right next to it. The dragonkin made a faint cry and sent a sharp gaze to Momonga. Now that he could cast magic, there was no worries of strong opponents. He was confident that he could one-hit a dragonkin. Anyway, there was a need to apologize to its owner. Thinking that, Momonga turned to face Aura. Sorry. I should have held back. Eh? I do not mind if you destroy the scarecrow. Without being affected in the slightest, seeing magic cast right next to the dragonkin, Aura did not show any signs of surprise or worry. She waved her hands and became flustered when Momonga apologized. The goal of the magic was to test if it affected another target. Was that what she believed? It was like she did not care if the dragonkin lived or died. Anyway, he had confirmed whether he could cast magic. Thus, he could conclude that he had the game abilities he had in Yggdrasil. Now he should use a magic to try and contact the GM, but he should not get his hopes up. Momonga activated another magic. Message. The first one he should contact was the GM. He heard a sound similar to when he had calls on his phone when he was in Yggdrasil. If he was not in certain locations, the sound would not be made and the call would be immediately cut. This time, how should he say it? Putting it in words would be extremely difficult. It was like extending a string of sorts and he felt like he was searching for something. However, that feeling continued and the effect of the magic ended. It was expected yet disappointing. Both emotions swam strongly through his head. Momonga recast the same magic. His target was not the GM. It was other members of Einzulgon. However, you could say that so it was like that, or perhaps you could say it was natural. No one answered. Momonga breathed softly and stifled his feelings and moved on to the next item. It would not be bad to try to contact Sabas, but anyway for now. Power was collected in the staff and was released. Summoned Primal Fire Elemental. He stabbed the staff forward and formed a large ball of light, in the middle of which held an extraordinary whirlpool of fire. It increased in speed and size with a diameter of 10 meters and a height of 15 meters. There was a large blast of purgatory flame and blistering hot winds swirled through the surroundings. The two bodies of the dragonkin held Aura, guarding her from the hot winds. Momonga's robes fluttered with the heat waves. It would not be weird for heat on this level to cause burns, but Momonga had absolute flame resistance and thus it had no effect on him. The tornado of flame ate up the atmosphere and grew larger, and released a shine like that of molten iron, and took up a humanoid shape. Primal Fire Elemental, an elemental spirit of the highest class. It was a level 80 monster. Uwa? Aura's voice was filled with admiration and looked up at it. In front of the highest class of spirit that he had never summoned before, Momonga had the face of a child that had received a toy that it had always wanted. Do you want to try fighting it? Eh? Aura was bewildered for a moment, and then put on an innocent smile. Maybe it was a bit too much to call her a chi. No, she was quite warped. Is it okay? I do not mind, even if you defeat it, it will not be a problem. Momonga shrugged his shoulders. The staff was in existence that allowed him to summon this monster once again tomorrow. More importantly, will it be fine? You are bad with those who use pure power, right? It will be okay. I can make myself immune to fire. I should be able to do something. Half listening, Aura began her preparations. She was probably coming up with a strategy in her head. If it is impossible, do not push yourself. Yes. A spirited reply. Aura had decided to fight and signaled the two dragonkin at her side to move away. She was probably going to fight alone. Primal Fire Elemental, the wavering mass of fire began to move. Defeat Aura. If you do, stop there. Return. The giant of fire made a mass of fire in the shape of a fist and quickly closed the distance between itself and Aura. Aura held her whip with both hands and readied herself for the fight. While giving Aura a sidelong glance, Momonga had a thought fluttering around in his mind. It was, what should I do now? The problem was that he had used a bit too much magic. He still had some left, but since he was not sure what would happen from here on out, he needed to recover some. If he could, he would like to go to a place where it could recover, but magic had tiers. They were from 1 to 10. And then there was magic which surpassed that. The consumption of MP became extremely important at this tier and was consumed from this tier alone. Assume that a magic caster has 100 MP. He could use tier 1 magic 100 times. However, he could only use tier 10 magic not more than 10 times. Overlords were another exception. Also, there was strengthening magic, for example, chantless magic, magic strengthening, magic conversion. If you use these, the MP cost would increase. The time it took to completely recover your MP was 6 hours. Basically, if you only use the highest tier, you would soon run out of gas. Incidentally, the base MP was the level times 10. And then there were stat bonuses, special achievements, equipment modification and class modifications. Momonga currently had 1980 points. This was mostly due to the staff of Einzulgon and the fact that he was a top-class magic caster in Yggdrasil. Since most level 100 players have 1,300 points, it is simple to understand the magnitude of the capacity. In regards to recovering MP, there were no such convenient things as MP recovery potions. The only way to recover it was the passing of time. Then how do most solo magic casters save their MP? There were scrolls, staffs and wands. These all had magic inside of them. Scrolls could only be used once, staffs and wands were predetermined. They were items that allowed magic to be cast until the charges were finished. However, the strength and duration of magic was unchangeable. Let us say that a level 10 magic caster used a protection spell which had a duration of 10 minutes, and that a scroll of the same magic was used. The effects of such spells would be about half the duration. In this situation, 5 minutes. Similar to how the duration was shortened, the effect also weakened. It could not go past half, but the damage was 3/4 of the original. There were other items that had limited daily charges but did not consume MP. The primal fire elemental that Momonga summoned was a result of such an item, and another example would be the band on his wrist that could cast a certain magic a certain number of times a day. However, these items were expensive and could not be used at a moment's notice. And compared to wands and staffs, scrolls were cheaper and were used more commonly. In the end, money is spent purchasing items. Due to that, most magic casters try to use only their MP. Staffs, wands and scrolls were preserved. As a result, and as time still passes when you are logged out, solo magic casters log out when they run out of MP and return the next day to play. However, there was no time. Momonga sent his gaze towards the band on his left wrist. There were 20 minutes left until the other guardians got here. He had until then to investigate. He had no time to replenish his MP. He had to investigate it later. The tests for magic and item activation were over. The remainder was his personal items. Momonga owned quite a few scrolls, wands and staffs. He was the type of person that hoarded everything. Even when he was facing the final boss in a video game, he did not use them. It was more miserly than carefulness. Just like that, Momonga hoarded his items. In Yggdrasil, they were in an item box, but now where were they? Momonga extended his hand into the air. It was nothing but bone. He recalled what happened when he opened the item box. It was like extending his hand into the surface of a lake. The middle of Momonga's hand was swallowed up and disappeared. It was like opening a window and Momonga moved his hand in a large sliding motion. Countless staffs were lined up neatly. It seemed that this was Yggdrasil's item box. Moving his hand, he scrolled through the item screen-like thing. Staffs, wands, scrolled, weapons, ornaments, gems, potions, there were innumerable magic items located inside. Momonga smiled. He felt safe. Now even if the whole of the great underground tomb became his enemy, he would be able to confirm his own safety. While watching the fighting aura, Momonga recalled all the information he had compiled up until now. Firstly, were the NPCs he had met up until now programs? No, they were the same as sentient humans. There was no way that such minute details could be included in the programming. They should be treated the same as humans and not as simple programs. Next was, what was this world? Unclear. It was reasonable to believe that the existence of magic was similar to that of the game, but he could not believe that it was the same as the game. If that was the case, then a world with magic, it would be reasonable to think of it as another world, right? Just how should he prepare himself? He had confirmed that he could use his Yggdrasil abilities. Therefore, if you thought about the base data, there were no strong enemies that could become a threat to the great underground tomb of Nezarec. The problem was, were there any threats which were outside of Yggdrasil? In any case, if there were stronger people out there, the gravity of that situation, he had no other options. What should the plan be from now on? Data collection. Aspects of this world was still unclear, and to put it simply, they were ignorant pilgrims. Carelessness could not be afforded, data collection was of the utmost importance. He had some hopes for the information that Sabas would bring back. If this was another world, should he try to return to his original? He was not sure. If he had any lingering regrets, he would say a third. If he had friends, he should do his best to go back. If his parents were alive, he would look for a way until he died or went insane. But there was no such thing. Going to the company, doing work, returning home to sleep. Until now he had returned home and entered Yggdrasil, making preparations should his friends return, but now even that was gone. Even now, he had not gone for a single day without thoughts about the company. Was it worth it to go back to that world? But, if he was going back, he would do his best for it. There were not many choices he could make. If the outside world was like hell, the possibility was high. What should I do now? Momonga's self-directed words went into the surroundings and disappeared. Overlord, first half, chapter 6, The Gathering. Everyone should be arriving soon. While wiping the sweat off her face with the towel, Aura says. The fight with the primal fire elemental ended in Aura's victory. The primal fire elemental had incredible destructive power and stamina. It damaged the surroundings with flames just by existing. However, to Aura, who was demonstrating spectacular evasion abilities, it would seem that it was just a giant target. If Aura were to take even a single hit, she would lose a considerable amount of stamina. So that such a thing wouldn't happen, she had to cast several defense magic in response. To the magic caster Momonga, it was a spectacular fight. That's right. Momonga let his gaze drop onto the watch wrapped around his right arm. The scheduled time had yet to arrive, and there probably will not be any guardians that would come late. It would not be strange if a lot of time had passed. Pooh. Breathing heavily, Aura began wiping the sweat accumulating on her throat. The ones that she missed formed into balls and rolled down her dark skin. Momonga silently opened his item box. From there, the first item he took out was a magic item, Pitcher of Endless Water. The pitcher was made of a crystal clear glass, and it was soon filled to the brim with refreshing water. Because of the coldness of the water, numerous water droplets condensed on the surface of the pitcher. He then took out one glass. Into the glass, that was no way inferior in quality, Momonga poured in some refreshing water. Aura. Have a drink. Eh? That would be being rude to Momonga-sama. While Aura was waving her hands in rejection, Momonga gave her a wry smile. Don't worry about it. You have always worked hard. I am simply thanking you for it. Phew. To the awkwardly blushing red-faced Aura, Momonga presented the glass. Thank you very much, Momonga-sama. This time, Aura did not reject and hang the towel on her shoulder. With her two hands, she accepted the glass and emptied it in one breath. Puh. Need another glass? Yes, please. The glass, which had been emptied in one moment, had water poured in from the pitcher. The water in the pitcher never depleted and poured out the same quantity of water as earlier. Aura had calmed down, and this time drank slowly. While watching this, Momonga placed his hand on his own throat. It felt like there was still some skin. After obtaining this body, he could not remember ever feeling thirsty. It was the same with sleeping. He could understand that as an undead it made sense that he would feel as such. Momonga's now empty hands began to touch his own body. Compared to when he was a human, the feeling was a bit dull. When he touched something, it felt that there was a thin cloth in between. On the other hand, his senses greatly improved and his vision and listening skills were extremely good. A body made of bones would seem to easily break, however, his were all harder than steel. Even though he expected it to be different after coming here, he felt satisfied and fulfilled with his body. This was probably why he was not scared. Phew. Need another? I'm not thirsty anymore. In response to the smiling aura, Momonga took back the glass and together with the pitcher and placed it back into the item box. I thought Momonga-sama would be scarier. Really? If that is the case then I wouldn't mind, but... Eh? The current you is much better. Definitely much better. Then I'll stay like this. Seeing Aura's vigorous answers, Momonga was bewildered but still managed to answer. Momonga had no choice but to put on a performance. The current him was the guildmaster of the highest-ranking guild, Einzulgon, and he had to play his part. He must not show any form of embarrassment whatsoever. Would I be the only one you're this kind to? Momonga did not say anything to the mumbling Aura but instead placed his hand on her head and started caressing it. Hey! Aura was surrounded by an atmosphere similar to that of a dog in front of its favorite toy. At that moment. Oh, would I have been the first to arrive? With a voice as sweet as candy, a shadow appeared. From that shadow, a woman appeared. Her entire body was clad in a soft jet black ball gown. The skirt bulged largely outwards, and felt like it had a considerable volume. It was also very long that it completely hid her legs. Frills and ribbons were attached to her bolero cardigan which she wore. Her breasts and shoulders were not exposed. In addition, she had on a pair of fingerless gloves, causing most of her body to be hidden. One of the parts that was not hidden was her face. It was extraordinarily beautiful and would make even a first-class work of art feel embarrassed. Her white skin, you could not call it healthy, but it was as white as wax. Her long silver hair was held in a ponytail and flowed down her back. She looked about 14 years of age, possibly younger, and could not completely hide her childishness. A combination born between cuteness and beauty, a beautiful gem. Her chest did not fit her age and bulged upwards. We were told specifically not to use gait. A disgusted voice from Momonga's side was heard. No trace of Aura's previous puppy-like atmosphere could be seen, and her voice was as cold as ice with open hostility. The girl, who had used the highest-ranking teleportation magic, ignored the killing intent released by Aura. She shuffled towards Ainz and stood in front of him. The perfume she applied had a wonderful smell. Stinks. Aura murmured silently. She was an undead but was not rotting. Although the girl could probably hear Aura's voice, nothing changed. Her eyes, like deep crimson rubies, were drowned in bliss. My lord. The only precious one I cannot control. Reaching out from Momonga's neck with her hands, she hugged him. Her red lips parted and her wet tongue was visible. The tongue that circled her lips seemed like a separate entity entirely. A fragrant smell escaped from her mouth. While this would suit a bewitching beauty, she was too young to have such a charm. Most people would smile at this. She was too short. Rather than looking like she was hugging him, it looked more like she was hanging from his neck. Not being used to women, this was completely overwhelming to Momonga. He wanted to take a step back but decided to just stand there. She was actually like this? That thought did not disappear from his mind. Shaltir Bloodfallen. The guardian of the first to third floors of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, the true vampire leader of the undead. It's been long enough. With a heavily low voice directed towards her, Shaltir finally responded and gave Aura a mocking smile. Oh, Chibisuke, you were here? I failed to notice as you had failed to enter my view. Aura's face stiffened. Shut up, fake boobs. And dropped the bombshell. Why do you know? Her persona crumbled. You can tell from a glance. It's bulging out weirdly. How many did you use? Uwa? As if trying to erase the said words, Shaltir waved her hands around in refusal. She had on an expression matching her age. You don't have any. At least I have, quite a bit there. At that moment, Aura grinned broadly, causing Shaltir to take a step back. Aura casually lifted up her hand to her chest. I'm only 76 years old. I still have lots of time. On the other hand, being an undead with no future must be tough, right? They don't grow. Shaltir groaned and stepped back. Speechless. That was the sort of expression she made. Confirming it, Aura raised a crack-like smile. I'm quite satisfied with what I have, Pooh. You bitch. I'll make you eat those words. Momonga heard a snap sound. A black mist spilled out from Shaltir's gloved hands. Aura readied her whip that she had used earlier. Momonga returned from his shocked state and took a deep breath in preparation to stop them. How noisy. It was a voice that was impossible for a human to have. The warped and rigid voice immediately stopped their fight. From where the voice came from, who knows from when it was there, a strange being stood there and while releasing cold air into the surroundings. It made you think of a 2.5-meter-tall insect walking on 2 feet. If there was a demon that was a crossbreed between a praying mantis and an ant, it would be like this. Its tail, that was more than twice his height, had numerous spikes that were sticking out. It also had a jaw that looked as if it was capable of snapping a human's arm with ease. 2 of its arms were holding a silver halberd, the remaining ones were holding a black ore-releasing mace and broadsword. The sparkling silver and hard bone armor released a cold air into the surroundings. Countless particles fell out, glittering like diamond dust. The guardian of the 5th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, the ruler of glaciers Cocytus. He hit the floor with the halberd's blade, causing the surroundings to slowly freeze. You are playing too much in front of our lord. This little girl was rude to me. Actually. Once again, Shaltir and Aura gave each other fearsome glares. Shaltir, Aura. Do not disappoint me. Surprisingly, their bodies jerked upwards, and simultaneously bowed their heads down. I apologize for my actions. Momonga calmly nodded his head in agreement and faced the demon that just appeared. You came, Cocytus. I shall come immediately when summoned, milord. A white breath escaped from his mouth. In response to that, the moisture in the surrounding air froze with a pocky-pocky sound. It was a cold that rivaled with, beat the flames from the primal fire elemental. Just by being nearby, your body temperature would drop to the point where you would be injured. However, Momonga could not feel anything. In fact, everyone here had resistances or countermeasures for the flames, cold and acid. Since there have been no invaders recently, you must have had quite a lot of free time, right? That is true. His jaws rattled together. He was probably laughing, right? Actually, I do have things I must do, and so, I cannot relax. Oh. What do you do normally? I spend my days training. It comes in handy anytime, anywhere. While it is difficult to tell from his appearance, Cocytus is a born and bred warrior. From his personality down to his concept design. If everyone in the great underground tomb of Nazarick were rated from their weapon skills, he would be the first. Oh, for my sake? Good work. You honor me. Oh, Demiurge has arrived. Following Cocytus' gaze, there was a shadow walking in from the entrance of the Colosseum. When it had reached a certain distance, the shadow elegantly bowed and opened its mouth. I apologize for making everyone wait. Standing 2 meters tall, and with a lustrous red skin. Cut to perfection, his jet black hair flowed downwards with a radiance. Red eyes sparkling with intelligence and countless wicked plots whizzed around in his head. From his temples grew horns that would remind one of a goat, and his back sprouted a set of giant jet black wings. One would be able to tell that he was not human. In his sharp-clawed hands was a scepter, and his body was clad in a majestic crimson robe, full of a king's dignity. A demon releasing flickering dark flames, Demiurge. The guardian of the 7th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, and created as the commander of the NPC defenses. And with this, everyone has gathered. Momonga-sama, Gargantua has still not arrived yet. A voice with a depth that could slip into people's hearts and draw them in could be heard. Infused into Demiurge's words was an ever-present spell. Its name was Domination Mantra. It could turn those with weak hearts into his personal puppets. However, none of the people present had been affected by this. To be affected, they must be level 40 or below. It was natural that it had no effect on the high-level guardians. To them, at best it was a comfortable voice. You know about Gargantua? Of course. The guardian of the 4th floor, strategic siege golem, Gargantua. Everyone present here knows this. Gargantua was a golem created by one of Yggdrasil's rules. It was not created from scratch by Ainzulgon. It could be used during sieges. However, it could never be used to protect the base. It was just that its text tag was configured to say that it was the guardian of the 4th floor. There was a problem with storage and so it was just kept submerged at the bottom of the underground lake of the 4th floor. It is not a guardian. It's simply a golem given the responsibilities of a guardian. So it was like that. I apologize for my ignorance. My friend has not arrived yet. Apart from Cocytus, everyone else froze. About that, he is always protecting my floor and we shouldn't bother him. That's right. Shaltir flashed a stiff smile while Aura quickly agreed with her. Kuuku, you say. He is not a guardian, but it would be better for him to know. I will leave it to Cocytus to contact him. Understood, milord. Now, my lord. All the guardians have gathered. Please order us to your heart's content. At Demiurge's words, everyone knelt down as one. So, firstly, thank you all for coming. We would offer anything up to Momonga-sama. This much is only natural. Demiurge acted as a representative and replied for them all. There appeared to be no sign that the other guardians wanted to say anything. Demiurge was the guardians' unanimous representative. I am happy with your loyalty. As much as I would like to talk about how happy I am, I gathered the guardians for a different reason. I do not completely understand it myself and there are several things I do not understand, but I would still like you to listen. Momonga breathed in and looked from the band on his right arm to the guardians. Right now, the great underground tomb of Nazarick has become embroiled in a strange situation. And this strange situation is... Honestly, I have no idea as well. However, I have felt an unusual event occur. So, I have gathered you all here. Have you noticed anything? Taking a quick glance at everyone's faces, Demiurge replied as a representative. No, I apologize but we have noticed nothing. Is that so? What sort of feeling did you receive? Explaining it would be quite difficult. Momonga closed his mouth and stopped talking. Although he noticed that the guardians were waiting for him, he needed to describe it with suitable words. A shaking, probably. A shaking, you say? Once again the guardians stole glances at each other, then Demiurge opened his mouth. It appears that we have not noticed anything. Was this caused by magic? Everything is unclear. Have there been any strange occurrences on any of the floors? There have been no strange occurrences on the 7th floor. The 6th floor too. The 5th floor as well. The 1st to the 3rd floors have had no strange occurrences. Momonga-sama, I believe it best to begin investigating the 4th floor. I leave it to you. Then I will handle the outside. Wait. I thought that he would come back in time but... Sabas is currently in the middle of investigating the outside. The atmosphere shook. One that was strongest in a bare-handed fight, an existence that even Cocytus could not match. It was puzzling that such a man was sent out on such a simple reconnaissance mission. Another thing was that since a man of Sabas' abilities was sent out, it showed just how much caution Momonga was giving this new world and how dangerous he thought it was. There were countless other people Momonga could have chosen from as well. However, from Momonga's point of view, he could not choose anyone else but Sabas. Firstly, the world that they were in had undergone a large change. Momonga saw his loyalty. Next, with this situation where they have no information, those with the best combat capabilities, sending those that can come back alive is only natural. In addition, Sabas' appearance was that of a human and he had no desire to get into an unnecessary fight. Demiurge and Cocytus had a low chance of this. While Momonga could apply illusion magic on them, if it was discovered, the fact that they were lying would damage relationships. And more importantly, it was not clear if such a magic would even work. It was because of the above that Momonga believed Sabas was suitable. I think that it is about time that he returned but... As if his words had raised a flag, Momonga sent his gaze towards the entrance of the Colosseum where Sabas had just appeared. While a specific time was not arranged, he came back when he was needed. As expected of a first-class butler. I apologize for my tardiness. No problem, I do not mind. More importantly, tell us more about the surroundings. Sabas sent a quick glance towards the kneeling guardians. Momonga calmly consented. Extreme circumstances. Naturally, the guardians of every floor should hear this report. Understood. Firstly, the surroundings within a 1-kilometer radius are grasslands. The great underground tomb of Nazarick was located in a poisonous swamp. Why would it now be in grasslands? Several of the Guardian had faces that seemed to ask if that was so. However, no one asked such a pointless question. This was because they believed that Sabas would never lie to his master. I saw several groups of small animals. However, I did not discover any humanoid creatures. About that, were the small animals monsters? No, it was a being similar to that of a prairie dog, a living organism with no fighting strength. Would it be wrong to describe it as farmland? Farmland, you say? It is mostly flat plains. There is nothing special about it. Is that so? Thank you for your hard work. While it was unclear where we were transferred to, it was best to raise the vigilance to the maximum. If we transferred to a person's land without notice, they would probably be angry. If they were normal, that is. However, in such a situation, we must not fight. We do not know their strength and they do not know ours. It will be troublesome for such a thing to happen. Shelter. Yes. Guard every floor with strict vigilance. However, do not kill any intruders and instead capture them. If you can, do not injure them at all. If the intruders come, inform the respective floor guardian. Also, try to not let the guardians receive any damage. Understood? Demiurge. Yes. Send out several scouts to make a detailed report. The goal is to collect information, not to fight, so choose those that are able to keep their heads. You are forbidden from personally going out. The reason why we are not moving is because we should not antagonize possible negotiation partners. Can I think of it as such? Basically, collecting information via interrogation is forbidden. That is so. We are definitely the strongest. However, if this area has things that are 100 times stronger than us, what can we do? This situation may be impossible, but should we still press forward based on our common sense? No, it is just as Momonga-sama had explained. It is important to maintain caution. We will use scouts that we can trust. Aura. Yes. Make a house where humans can stay on the 6th floor. Why is this so? We can put prisoners there. It is just as Gokaitis has said. I do not want to enter the 9th floor, and the other floors have other problems. The 6th floor is the most suitable. That is true. Remembering the other floors, Aura nodded in agreement. It's like an internment camp for prisoners. We will be able to monitor them from there. Understood. Afterwards, treat the guests well. Also, do not make it look like a shack. Yes. Build a house that is evidently sturdy from a glance. How many people should it be able to hold? Yes, about 10 people will do. Kokaitis. Yes. Take your most elite servants that can be trusted and send them to the 9th floor to guard it. Make any necessary arrangements with Sabas. Yes. Leave it to me. Sabas. Send the maids to the 10th floor to defend it. Pay close attention to the defense of each floor together. Work together with Gokaitis' servants. Yes, understood. To the guardians and your servants, you are permitted to enter the 10th floor. If anything happens, immediately report to me. Lastly, I was thinking that I should change my name. The air fluctuated. Momonga was the name of Einzulgun's guildmaster. It was a guild that placed heavy emphasis of majority rule. Commanding everything based on only his opinion was definitely unacceptable. If that was the case, then he would throw it away. I will inform you of my new name later. Now, let everyone's respective operations begin. Hearing Momonga's orders, the guardians began moving as one. Their movement was full of power and dignity, almost as if you were unable to touch them. In front of such a spectacle, Momonga trembled with emotion. Because they obeyed his orders? Wrong. Because he was strong? Wrong. Because he was beautiful? Wrong. It was because the NPCs made by his comrades from Einzulgun were this amazing. That golden brilliance was still here. The crystallization of everyone's opinions and feelings was right in front of him. Momonga was truly happy for that. Overlord First Half Chapter 7, Flames of War Part 1. Carney Village. Founded 100 years ago by Thomas Carney, it was a village part of the kingdom. The mountain range that runs through the border between the empire and the kingdom, the Azerlija mountain range. At its southern base was a large forest, the Great Forest of Tobe. It was a small village just apart from it. The population was about 120. A village with 25 families was not that rare in the Riestais kingdom. The distance between it and the fortress city, Irantal, was about 50 kilometers. It was a distance that would take 2 days on foot. Harvesting the blessings of the forest and agricultural produce were their main sources of income. Excluding the merchant that comes thrice a year to buy the herbs the villagers harvested from the forest, the tax collector only comes once a year. People mostly do not come, and the word "stopped in time" would suit the village perfectly, and such a thing was common in the villages of the kingdom. Henriette had lived in that village for about 16 years. The mornings were early. She woke up at roughly the same time that the sun rose. Unlike large cities where there was magic lighting, such a scene was commonplace in this village. The first thing she did was to draw water from the well near her house. Water drawing was a woman's job. When she filled up the large pot in her house with water, the first job would be over. Her mother would be finished preparing breakfast around that time, so the four of them would have breakfast. Breakfast would be an oatmeal of barley or wheat. There would also be cooked vegetables. Occasionally there would be dried fruits as well. Then her father and mother would leave for the fields. Her 12-year-old sister would head to the forest to get firewood and then help out in the fields. In the center of the village, the bell in the plaza would ring at about noon. Then they would stop their work and break for lunch. Lunch was black bread that was baked several days prior. There was also a soup that had scraps of dried meat added inside. Afterwards was more field work. When the sky begins to redden, she would return from the fields to prepare dinner. Dinner was the same black bread that she had for lunch, along with some bean soup. If they had some meat from a hunter, there would be some meat in it as well. And while talking with her family in the light of the kitchen, she would stitch fraying parts of her and her family's clothes. Her bedtime was about 6 p.m. That sort of daily life. She thought that it would continue indefinitely. On that day, Henry had welcomed the morning as always, and had went to the well. Pulling up a bucket of water, she transferred the water to a small jar. It would take 3 trips to fill up the pot they had in their house. Okay. Henry rolled up her sleeves and carried the jar. Although the jar would become considerably heavier when water was added, she found it quite easy to carry. While thinking that it was fun, Henry began to return home. At that moment, she heard something and turned in that direction. The atmosphere was dense and she got goosebumps. It was the sound of wood breaking. And then, a scream? While it sounded like a strangled bird, it was different. It sent chills down her spine. It couldn't be happening. Just my imagination. I'm wrong. Words of denial flashed through her mind. Panic spread through her body. The scream came from the direction of her home. She let go of the jar. There was no way she could hold such a heavy object. Her long skirt got entangled with her legs, but fortunately, she maintained her balance. Once again, she heard a voice. Henry's heart pounded in her chest. Screaming. She was not wrong. Running. 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 She did not remember ever running this fast before. She ran at such a speed that she almost entangled her legs with one another. The neighing of horses. The screams of humans. Crying voices. They were becoming louder. In Henry's vision, she saw a man wearing armor swinging a sword at a villager from afar. The villager screamed, and then collapsed. The sword that was about to pierce him stopped. Mulga-san. Everyone knew everyone in such a small village. She knew the dead man well. He was occasionally a bit noisy, but he was still a good person. He did not deserve to die like this. She was about to stop, but she grit her teeth and put more strength into her legs. The distance, which she usually never noticed, was now extremely long. She began to hear roars and jeering. In the midst of that, her house finally entered her vision. Oda-san. Okaa-san. Nemu. While yelling the names of her family members, she swung the house door open. There she saw 3 frightened faces with a pouch in one hand. Those faces disappeared when they saw Henry and changed into a look of relief. Henry. Are you okay? Ah, Henry. Her mother's warm hands held her in a hug. Now, Henry's here. Hurry and escape. The current situation of the Emmets was quite bad. As they were worried about Henry and did not leave for fear of passing her. They did not know when she would return and they could not just abandon a family member. And so they lost the time to escape, and now danger had arrived. They were about to leave when a shadow appeared at the entrance. Sunlight glinted off of the back of the knight's plate mail. His crest was that of the Baharuth Empire. His clenched hand wielded a sword. The Baharuth Empire, the neighboring country to the Riesti's kingdom. It occasionally went to war with the kingdom. However, the war usually only took place in the walled city of Erantal. They had never extended their reach. However, that eternal peace was broken. From the gaps in the helm, Henry felt a cold gaze counting their numbers. Henry felt his gaze licking her. It was very unpleasant. The knight gripped the sword tightly, causing the grip to squeak. He was about to enter the house when... Arg. Oomph. Her father tackled the knight who had entered. The two of them tumbled out of the house together. Hurry up and go. You bastard. Blood rolled down her father's face. He probably got cut when they were fighting. While her father and the knight were fighting, they fell to the ground. while her father was stabbing with his knife, and while the knight was stabbing with his short sword. While seeing her family's blood, Henry's head completely blanked out. Would it be better to help her father, or would it be better to run away? Henry. Nemu. Her mother's cries pulled her back to reality, and her mother pulled a bitter face. Henry gripped her sister's hand and pulled. She resisted the sudden pull, but they needed to get to the great forest as soon as possible. The screams of horses, shouts, the clashing of metal. And then, a sour smell. The places around the village, they dived into Henry's nose, ears and eyes. Where were they from? While experiencing this, they ran. When running through a wide place, you should make yourselves as small as possible. With this in mind, they kept to the shadows of the houses. Her body was frozen by fear. Her heart was pounding in her chest. It was not just from the running. The small hand within hers was moving as well. Her sister's life. Running slightly in front, her mother was about to turn a corner when she stiffened, and then quickly retreated. Her hand gesturing at her to run. The moment she realized the reason, Henry's mouth narrowed, and she stifled her crying voice. She gripped her sister's hand and ran away. She did not want to see what happened next. The edge of the village got closer. The running Henry heard the noisy sound of clanging metal. It was a constant sound. She prayed and looked behind her. It was just as she had thought. The worst case, a single knight was chasing after them. Just a little more. She suppressed her feelings which she wanted to throw up. She could not waste effort on them. She was breathing heavily. She felt that she could collapse at any moment. If she was alone she would probably have stopped a long time ago. The presence of her sister gave her the strength to move. She took a glance back. The distance between them had not changed. Even while wearing armor, there was no decline in his speed. Sweat dripped down her body and she felt cold. If this continued, she could not escape with her sister. Let go. Henry heard those words. If you're alone you might escape. Do you want to die here? It might be safer to escape alone. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Henry grit her teeth while spitting out those words. She put more strength into her grip. She was a terrible sister, thinking about these sort of things. Hurry, run. Yes. Why did her sister who about to cry not do so? It was simple. It was because she believed in Henry. She believed that her sister could get them out of this. Taking large strides to match her own, her sister lost her balance. Henry was also pulled down by her. Quickly stand. Yes. However, a lot of time was lost. Henry heard the creak of a chain right next to her. The knight had stopped to catch his breath. The sword in his hand was wet with blood. It did not stop there. His armor and helmet also had bloodstains. Henry shielded the back of her sister and glared at the knight. If you stop resisting, I won't make it painful. There was no kindness there. Just mockery. Even if you run, I will still kill you. He used such a tone. Henry flared up. What was this person saying? Henry faced the knight, who slowly raised his sword. It was about to move downwards and slice through Henry. Don't look down on us. Ugh. Henry hurled her fist at the knight's iron helmet. Her body's anger and the desire to protect her sister were kept in her fist. There was no fear in her punch. It was a punch that had the power of her whole body. The sound of broken bones could be heard. The momentarily delayed pain ran through her whole body. The knight reeled heavily backwards from her punch. Quickly. Yes. Ignoring the pain, Henry was about to run when she felt a red-hot pain on her back. Ugh. You bitch. Being beaten by a girl he was underestimating was humiliating. It caused the knight to lose his composure. Although Henry was alive, the knight had lost his composure. Since they had tried to escape, it was normal for him to be swinging his sword at them. They were not lucky. Henry was wounded and the knight was furious. There was no way out of this alive. Henry understood fully. The chance that they could escape was very low. There was still quite a distance between them and the forest. She did not think that they could escape from a knight on horseback. There was also the option of going back home and hiding in the hidden basement. However, he probably would not allow that. She was sorry for dying, but the important thing was to protect her sister. She would try to replace her sister's life with hers. The burning pain on her back throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. A sticky substance was flowing out. But she still ran. Henry grit her teeth, and distanced herself from the knight. Then she saw despair. There was darkness. It was the embodiment of death. An undefeatable existence. Clad in a jet-black robe, it looked like darkness had spilled over from another world. A face of nothing but bone, his empty eye sockets held a shimmering red flame, as if searching for prey. Divine and yet terrifying, the staff he was clutching had collected all the beauty in this world. The air froze. In the presence of the ruler of despair, even time itself froze. Henry forgot how to breathe. It would kill herself and her sister. That was why she could see it. The figure of an envoy appeared from another world. Henry thought that. At least until the movement of the night behind her stopped. Ka. She heard the breath of someone who could not even scream. Who had urinated? It could have been herself, or it could have been her quivering sister, or maybe it was the sword-wielding knight. She no longer felt any pain. In fact, she could not feel anything apart from fear. Slowly, the fleshless bony fingers moved. It extended past Henry and as if to grab something, formed a splayed hand at the knight. She wanted to avert her gaze, but she could not move due to her fear. If she looked away, it seemed that something even more terrifying would happen. Ah! The sound of metal and screaming combined to make a harsh sound. Her heart was beating too fast, it seemed that it would stop at any moment. Grasp heart. At the moment when the embodiment of death made a gripping motion, a sound of clattering metal could be heard from behind her. Moving her eyes away from death was indeed scary, but she lost to the small curiosity in her heart and sent her gaze to the knight sprawled on the ground. The knight was no longer moving. Dead. Yes, dead. The danger that she was running away from had left this world so simply that it was laughable. However, she could not enjoy it. Because death had changed its shape, becoming thicker. Death moved. It faced Henry. The darkness in her vision grew larger. It would consume Henry, wouldn't it? Those thoughts floated around in her brain. Henry hugged her sister tightly. The idea of escape was no longer in her head. If the person was human, then she could at least have a fleeting hope and still move. But the existence in front of her simply blew away such hopes. An instantaneous death. That was what she wished for. Her sister was hugging her waist and shivering in fear. She wanted to save her, yet she could not. She could do nothing but apologize for her own powerlessness. At least she would not be alone when she died. And then... Eh? Henry let out a dumbfounded voice. Death had walked right past her. Overlord First Half Chapter 8, Flames of War Part 2. While sitting in a lavish chair, Momonga watched a 1-meter-tall mirror. However, it was not reflecting his figure. Planes. The mirror was like a television, showing a different scenery. He extended his hand, and shifted it to the right. Like a camera, the scene slid with his finger. The staff would be a bother, so he put it back in the item box. The mirror of remote viewing. In Yggdrasil, this item was used to peek at places that were packed with people, such as castles and towns, an item that allowed the user to choose the best time to shop. However, it had now changed to an item that could reflect scenery. Looking down on a scenery that seemed like it came straight out of a movie, it spread out before him. The current one was the morning. The morning dew on the grass beautifully sparkled in the morning light. Fumu. Momonga drew a circle in the air, causing the scenery to change. It had been an hour since he had noticed the function of this magic item had changed. He had to test a lot of things, but there was no way that a lone human could do it by himself. Honestly, he was sick of it. Since he became like this, he had no desire for sleep. And so he was constantly finding Wally, but it was lame how the scenery was always plains. How the heck do you change the viewing distance? While thinking about how great it would be to have an instruction manual, Momonga repeated his actions. Oh. After a bit of experimenting, he finally got the hang of it. The happiness he felt was like that of a programmer who had just worked 8 hours overtime and finally finished. By repeating his actions several more times, he finally got it to his desired height. Ha, I'm tired. While enjoying himself, he turned his head. Okay, next. As if gaining a new toy, Momonga moved to a bird's-eye view. He tried to extend it as large as possible. First he would try to see his own base, the great underground tomb of Nezarec. In Yggdrasil, they were located in the middle of a swamp, but Sabas had said that they were surrounded by fields. The great underground tomb of Nezarec was 300 meters wide in all 4 directions. It was enclosed by 6-meter-tall perimeter walls, with 2 entrances of the front and back gate. The grounds were kept clean, and was quite beautiful, but the giant tree in the cemetery gave the entire place a gloomy atmosphere. There was no pattern to the tombstones, and the combination of the clutter and the cut grass gave off a discomforting feeling. There were lots of statues of goddesses and angels dotting the cemetery, some of which could have been regarded as art. And then there were 4 mausoleums at the 4 cardinal directions with a large mausoleum in the center. The surroundings of the central mausoleum, which served as the entrance to the great underground tomb of Nazarick, held 8 10-meter-tall armor-wearing figures. It was a sight he was used to seeing. But seeing it from above made it feel refreshing. Originally, they were supposed to be skeleton soldiers like older guards here, but they probably retreated and he could not find them. Being satisfied with what he saw, and Momonga began looking for a place with humans. A bit of time passed, and a village was reflected in the mirror. It was about 2 kilometers southwest of Nazarick. It was near a forest, with wheat fields dotting its surroundings. The word pastoral would fit it perfectly. Momonga zoomed in on the village and felt uncomfortable. A festival? It was morning, and yet people were entering and leaving their houses, and running around. They were all rushing around. Expanding his view, Momonga frowned. The people who he thought were villagers were dressed shabbily and there were people dressed like knights waving swords around. An ordinary scene. Every time the knights swung their swords, a villager would fall. The villagers could not mount a resistance. They just desperately fled. And then the knights would chase them down and kill them. The horses the knights were riding were in the fields, eating the wheat. This was a massacre. Momonga felt like vomiting. DCH. Spitting out his disgust, he was about to change the scene. This village has no value. If he went, he would only see corpses. Then there was no point in watching further. He did not gain any sick pleasure from watching murders. Momonga was not an ally of justice. His level was 100. But this world's normal level might be 10,000, just like what he had said to Demiurge. He could not recklessly charge into such a situation. If Sabas or Demiurge was here, he could have sent them, but the only one in this room was Momonga. In addition, the knight might have some reason for killing the villagers. Illness, crimes for example. He could think of many others. If he repelled them, he might make an enemy of the country the knights were from. There was too little information. If there was information, it might have been worth it to go and save them. However, there was no worth in saving that village. The price of life varied with the location. In present-day Japan, the price would be high. However, if you go to Africa, it will drop significantly. To those that do not know a world where all life is equal, there is only one sentence that can be said. Between an important person and a complete stranger, who would you save? It is very easy for your life to be stolen. This should be kept in mind at all times. Yes. Momonga was not an ally of justice. Although he had maintained a facade of calmness, he was actually quite angry. He moved his hands, and a different part of the village was shown. There, 2 knights were trying to separate a knight and a villager. He was forcefully pulled away and made to stand with his hand restrained. In front of Momonga, the villager was stabbed with the sword. Once, twice, thrice, he was stabbed repeatedly by the angry knight. Then, he was kicked and sent flying. Blood sprayed everywhere as he rolled on the ground. That was of course, a coincidence. While in Yggdrasil, no one could detect the user of the mirror. The villager and Momonga's eyes met. It might have been just him but... While blood filled his mouth, he forced his mouth to move. His vision blurred and he probably did not know what he was looking at. But he still clung to life, and forced the words out. Please save my daughters. Again. Momonga was not an ally of justice. He would gain nothing out of this, he would not help those who were not even his acquaintances. Benefits were not everything, but it was more than half. However, that was. If there was a benefit, it would be the very act of saving them. I would have needed to investigate their fighting abilities anyway. Who were those words for? Murmuring, Momonga took a bird's-eye view of the situation. He looked closely for places where some villagers were still alive. When he found one young girl had just knocked back a knight. And she took the hand of another smaller one, probably her sister, and were about to run off. He opened the item box, and took out the staff of Einzulgon. In that period, the girl's back was cut. Momonga's face distorted in disgust. Momonga instantly chanted a spell. Greater teleportation. His view changed, and changed to the place where he was looking at earlier. There were 2 young girls. The older sister probably, The older one had hair that extended all the way to her chest. Her tanned and healthy skin was dyed white in fear. Her black eyes had tears in them, and if her face was not a terrified one, she would be considered quite cute. The younger sister had her face buried in her sister, her frightened body was trembling. She was probably terrified. No, it was natural. It would be weird if she was not. Passing over the two girls, he sent his gaze towards the night behind them. He was probably surprised by Momonga's sudden teleportation. His hands were trembling. Momanga had been living a life estranged from violence. The closest was fighting in Yggdrasil. Although he had never experienced a life-and-death situation, he was currently extremely calm. His empty hand split itself, and reached out. Grasp heart. It was a magic of the 9th tier. A magic where you grip and crush the opponent's heart. If it was resisted, the opponent would be temporarily stunned. It was one of the instant death spells that Momanga used well. Especially since there was a beautiful corpse, Data, left behind. The knight collapsed. His resistance was too low. So he died. Momanga gazed coldly at the collapsed knight. The unexpected thing was, he did not feel anything from killing a human. The beauty of an undead body? Or maybe the rage against the knight? No, it was something different. Momanga did not know what it was. Coming this far and yet not being able to take the last step, he felt such a frustration. Momanga began walking. Since he had killed the knight, the girls would have been afraid. So he went right next to them. At that time, the older one let out a bewildered voice. Momanga did not know what it meant, but he felt no need to find out. Anyway, he should first confirm the safety of this place. He looked at the back of the older one with her torn clothes, and saw blood flowing down her back. While doing so, he hid them behind himself. And then he glared at a knight that had just existed from the side of a house. The knight noticed him as well. Frightened, he took one step back. You can chase down girls and yet you can't against a different opponent? While mumbling, Momanga thought about the next spell he should use. The earlier one was quite a high-tiered spell. And thus he could not confirm how strong the knights were. What sort of effect did his magic have on the knights? The strength of this world, this was a good chance for him to find out. Finally, although I feel bad about forcing this experiment on you, won't you be so kind as to play along? Magic arrow. 10 balls of light were created, and rushed towards the knight, creating an afterglow. The first blew him away, the second lifted him into the air. The remaining floated around the lifted knight. And then, like in a fighting game, comboed him. Like a broken doll with its limbs outstretched, the knight fell to the ground. Naturally, he did not move. Momanga had prepared himself for another round, but was perplexed. Magic arrow was a first-tier magic, the lowest tier. While it was true that the number of arrows increased according to the level, and the magic was quite convenient, but it was difficult to one-shot a level 10 monster. Then these knights were below level 10 in Yggdrasil. He could not think of anything else. Power left his body. Too weak. Of course, it was possible that only these two were weak. But, it was still difficult to regain his earlier worry. Anyway, if it became dangerous, he would immediately cast a transfer magic. It could also be that their defenses and body strength was non-existent but their attack power was extremely high. Momanga could possibly be instantly killed. These thoughts flooded his mind. In Yggdrasil, if you hit the neck, it would be counted as a critical hit, and the damage would greatly increase. If it was the real world, you would surely die. Momanga's lost worry had changed into caution. If he was careless, he would die like an idiot. Firstly, he should investigate their abilities. Momanga cast his special ability. High-tier undead creation, Death Knight. Momanga created one undead monster due to his special skill. It was possible for him to create a strong undead, but he created an undead that was used as a convenient wall whenever he went solo. The Death Knight was the best one of those undead monsters that he could use as a wall. Its level was 35, but its defense was equivalent to that of a level 40 monster. However, its attack was that of a level 25 monster. When Momanga had ventured out, it would be instantly killed by a powerful monster, but the fact that it could endure one hit was enough for a magic caster like himself. And so the monster he would create would be this, Momanga decided. In Yggdrasil, the moment he summoned a monster, it would cause the air in the surroundings to boil and then appear. But, it seemed to be different in this world. A black mist oozed out of the sky, and fell on and wrapped around the knight who had his heart crushed. The mist swelled, and swallowed the knight. And then the knight, which could no longer be thought as human, jerked, and while staggering, stood up. It made a gobbly sound, and a black liquid flowed out of the gaps between the knight's helmet. It was probably coming from his mouth. The flowing sticky substance wrapped and covered his entire body. It made one think of a human being eaten by a slime. Once the knight was completely covered in darkness, its shape began to change. After a few blinks, the darkness flowed down to the ground. There stood an existence that would be called the spirit of a knight. It was 2.3 meters tall. Like its height, its body was widened considerably. It would be closer to a beast than a human. A large shield on its left arm covered 3/4 of its body, a tower shield, and its right hand wielded a flamberge. Originally, its two hands should be holding a 1.3-meter cutlass, but this giant could wield one easily with one hand. The sword blade had a reddish-black aura emanating out of it, and it pulsated like a heart. Covering its giant body was a black full-body armor. Blood vessel-like crimson patterns ran all over it. In addition, unlike the earlier armor which was designed for functionality, this one was the embodiment of violence, and thorns sprouted from all over. The helm was like that of a devil, the face could be seen. In there was a rotting corpse of a person. Inside the gaping eye sockets was a hatred of the living and a desire and expectation of slaughter. With its jet-black cloak fluttering in the wind, the Death Knight awaited its orders. Its imposing attitude seemed appropriate for an undead knight. These knights in the village, Momonga pointed to the corpse of the first knight who he had killed with magic arrow. Kill them. Dash. A roar. Anything that hurt it got goosebumps all over its skin. Its thirst for blood was choking, and the air fluctuated. It was the starting signal of a different massacre. The victims had changed, they had become prey. The Death Knight began running. Just sprinting. Without hesitation, it was like a bloodhound that had found its prey. An emotion humans could not understand, the dead's hatred of the living was powering it. Momonga watched as the Death Knight grew smaller in the distance, and compared the difference with Yggdrasil. If he could pinpoint it, it would be the degree of freedom. Originally, the Death Knight was supposed to stay at its summoner's side, and receive damage from monsters. They would accept the order in that manner and not move of their own accord. As it was the way the AI was built, it cannot be helped. It would be good if it did not get in his way, but when he thought that he knew something, he had made a large mistake. A mistake born from preconceptions. Everyone makes mistakes, but the current situation could result in fatal consequences for Momonga. Momonga narrowed his eyes, and cast the magic he had stored in the band on his right arm. The magic he had activated was, Sense Enemy. There were no enemies in the surroundings. Now. Momonga turned and looked back. The earlier two girls noticed Momonga's gaze and shrunk their bodies away, even trying to hide themselves. The reason probably was the figure of the Death Knight that had appeared. Or maybe it was due to its roar. That was well, as the one who had killed the knights before their very eyes, he could understand their fear. Convinced as such, Momonga faced the older one and extended his hand. I will heal your wounds. An action with that thought in mind. As a person who was familiar with the game Yggdrasil, Momonga was not surprised by the appearance of an Overlord. Even if he stood in front of other players, no one would be scared either. It was because everyone knew that it was a game, and they had information that such appearances and monsters existed. However, just imagine. What would happen if the person did not know? What if it was the real world? What would happen if a monster that could easily kill a human extended its hand towards you? There was only one reaction. The space between the older sister's legs were wet. The younger one as well. There was a pungent smell of ammonia in the surroundings. Waves of fatigue, which should no affect him, crashed into him. Momonga had no idea what to do. But they seemed to be hurt. However, as a member of society, Momonga used the skills he had honed. While pretending not to see anything, he opened the item box, and took out a bag. Named the Infinity Haversack, it could carry up to 500 kilograms of weight. Although the item box allows you to store an infinite amount of items, when items were placed inside this bag, a shortcut could be used to activate the item. However, the item box does not allow this. Put the items that you want to instantly use inside this bag. This was a fact that even a greenhorn in Yggdrasil knew. Momonga held one of such an infinity haversack. There should be a potion inside there somewhere. He put his hand inside and unhesitatingly took out a red potion. Minor healing potion. Recovering 50 horsepower, it was a medicine that was often used in the beginnings of Yggdrasil. However, this item was useless to Momonga. As for why, It was because this recovery potion had positive energy, and would deal damage to the undead Momonga. A poison. The only reason why he held on to such a thing was as when he went on adventures with his friends, his party members would use them. Drink. Momonga thrust out the red medicine, causing the older one's face to be filled with fear. I will drink it. So let my sister. Wani-chan. The younger was about to cry and was trying to stop the older one. The older one was apologizing and was trying to take the potion. Were they mistaking it for poison or human blood or something? What is this? Although people were still dying and being killed. Although Momonga was an understanding person, what sort of comedy was this? Rage boiled up inside of him. Hurry up and drink. While I'm playing around here, other villagers are dying, you know. As a response to those words, the older one widened her eyes, and drank it all down in one gulp. And then, she showed a surprised expression. She touched her right hand, and then her back. She was surprised by the lack of pain. No way. She probably could not believe it. She was touching her right arm over and over. If the healing potion has been drunk, effects will appear. Momonga engraved that information into his memory. Then the next question was born. What would happen if applied directly to the wound? Further testing will need to be done. Is the pain gone? Yes. The older sister made a blank face. If it was just this level of wounds, then a minor healing potion would have worked, huh? Momonga moved on to the next question. This was an unavoidable question. Depending of the answer, everything could change. Do you know about magic? Have you seen humans that can use magic? I am asking you that. No, I have not seen any. Momonga clicked his tongue and stifled his annoyance. It was fine if magic had remained a secret. However, make no mistake. If Momonga and the others were the only ones able to use magic, then it would be troublesome. If that was the case, then he would have to limit his use of magic. Having to suppress an advantage he had did not make him happy. The older one looked like she was about to say something, and so Momonga used his jaw to signal her to continue. But what? I have heard that there are such people in the towns. I see, then this will be quick. I am a magic caster. Feeling relieved, Momonga chanted magic. Anti-life cocoon. Wall of protection from arrows. Like a spider web, crystal clear threads, with the sisters at the center, formed a 2-meter dome around them. Subsequently, although invisible, the airflow changed. Originally, this magic would be perfect if he chanted it. However, as how magic worked in this world was unclear, he did not. If there was a magic caster, it would be unfortunate. A magic that blocks out living creatures, and a magic that blocks out arrows. Unless the enemy uses poison gas or magic, you should be fine. However, it is easy to leave it. But, if you do that stupid thing, know that I will not save you a second time. After simply explaining the magic to the surprised sisters, Momonga began to walk away. He recalled the overall shape of the village. Excuse me. What is it? He was about to walk away when he was stopped by the older one. Momonga swallowed his desire to yell. They were victims. They might have lost their family. Probably their acquaintances too. How could he vent his frustrations on them? Yo, your name? The girl gulped and asked. Would you please tell us your name? He was about to introduce himself but then shut his mouth. How should he introduce himself? Momonga was the guildmaster of Einzulgone. Now, what was he? The master of the great underground tomb of Nezaric's name was. Momonga thought. My friends. What would everyone think of monopolizing that name? Would they be happy? Or would they frown? Since he came here, he wanted to say it. That name cannot be used for one person. He immediately composed himself. That name reflected the existence at the highest peak. If it went to ruins, then he would again make it a legend. I will turn our guild into a legend. I am the ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, Einzulgone. Overlord First Half Chapter 9, Despair. There, the hunters became the hunted. Ooh-ay-ay-ay. The air shook. In accordance with it, the monster in front of my eyes, the Death Knight advanced. I unknowingly took 2 steps back. My armor trembled, and the harsh clattering sound entered my ears. The tip of the sword I was holding shook. Of course, I was not alone. Surrounding the Death Knight, 18 others did the same. No one was trying to escape. Was it because of their courage? No, that was not it. They are afraid to divert their eyes even for a second. The moment their eyes get diverted, it would swing its sword. That was understood by the intuition that every living creature possessed. The sounds of teeth clattering with each other could be heard. Lons de Grand cursed his faith in God. He had probably cursed him many more times in the past few minutes than he ever had done in his lifetime. If God had truly existed, he would probably have descended and smited this evil. Why did he have to ignore a faithful believer such as Lons? There is no God. Only a fool would sing such a stupid thought, but Lons wasn't the foolish one, right? Hiya AAA. A high-pitched scream echoed throughout the surroundings. One of the knights in the encirclement gave in to his fear, fleeing whilst showing his back on the enemy. Some kind of line was cut, as though a tension of a bow was snapped at one stroke. The scream should have snapped their mentality likewise. Normally, that would be the case. However, among the men within the encirclement, no one dared to escape. A black wind swept into a corner of Lon's vision. The escaping knight was about to make his third step, when he made a horrible sound as his body got split into two. His right and left sides separated, and fell to the ground. The existence that sliced the knight was bathed in blood. The sour stench of entrails spread throughout the surroundings, and the pink organ spilled onto the ground. The flamberge was swung downwards. The blood-drenched Death Knight narrowed his eyes, and growled loudly. A voice of joy. It was enjoying the process. Killing Lan's companions, bathing in their blood. Even though its face was rotting, it could still be red like a human's. The Death Knight was having fun. An absolute existence beyond theirs, the slaughterer stood there. Seeking salvation, Lons moved his line of sight. They were in the middle of the village. An open space, where 40 weak villagers cowered in fear from watching Lons and the knights. Children were hiding behind a wooden pedestal, which was slightly taller than them. Several were holding wooden sticks, but did not move. They could not grip their weapon properly due to their fear. When Lons and the others attacked the village, they rounded up the villagers into the center of the village. After the houses were emptied, they were burned down with alchemical oil. After all, hidden underground rooms were quite common in this kind of village. Around the village were 4 mounted knights wielding bows, patrolling. If anyone escaped to the outskirts of the village, they would surely be killed. Of course, there would be villagers who would think of escaping into the troublesome forest, so 2 knights were placed there. Although the massacre had ran into some slight problems, it had progressed smoothly and they managed to get all the villagers in one place. Gathering them, killing them and allowing a few to escape, it was supposed to be like that. Lons remembered that moment. That scene which left a deep imprint in his mind. One of the villagers was about to escape, and the knight that was about to slash him from behind, Alien, danced in the air. What happened? The insanity of the situation made it impossible to comprehend. Full body armor, even with magic, was still 10 kilograms. A knight that was a full-grown male would weigh 80 kilograms. But the knight of about 90 kilograms in weight was thrown through the air like a ball. Alien flew 7 meters into the air, fell to the ground, and did not move a muscle. At where Alien was a black giant. The giant shield that had blown Alien away was slowly being lowered. That was the beginning of despair. At first someone slashed at it while panicking. However, due to the armor that covered its body, even if the knight had managed to get past its shield, not even a scratch was made. In addition, the Death Knight was not using its sword, and it was waving its shield around like it was playing. No, while playing, it had blown away the knights. Using a degree of strength such that they won't die. Lons, too, was blown away with a single hit. Every time he breathed, pain shot through his stomach. The Death Knight swung its sword a second time. At the location where a knight was attempting to flee. The one who tried to escape was Rylik. A good-natured man, but when drunk, a terrible one. His limbs and then his head flew off his body. A gale accompanied the great attack, and they understood. Not with their heads, but with their hearts. If the Death Knight became serious, it could chase down and kill everyone. They could do nothing but die. Although the insides of their helmets are not visible, everyone was thinking the same thing. Crying voices reverberated throughout the surroundings. Grown men were sobbing like terrified children. "Oh God, please save us. Oh God." He could hear cries from several others. If he let down his guard, he felt that he would kneel and send a prayer to God. "Why, you guys? Hold down that monster." A panicking voice could be heard. It was a harsh voice, one tainted with madness. It came from right next to the bisected knight, from a knight standing beside the Death Knight. He initially could not discern the knight's identity from the voice, but there was no one else that would say those lines. Captain Belius. Lons frowned. If he could describe him in one word, it would be scum. When a girl was trying to escape, he chased after her with his low-life feelings of lust. Her father tried to save her. When they were pulled apart, he stabbed him mercilessly with his feelings of rage. That type of man. However, as a wealthy person in the country, he was just added to the unit of knights, but the words captain didn't befit him. He was hated within the unit. I will escape. I am not a person that will die here. You guys, buy me some time. Buy me some time to escape. There was no way anyone would move. It was natural, they would do anything to not get targeted by the Death Knight, and they kept their heads down like they were avoiding a storm. Especially since it was a man that no one liked. Hi. The Death Knight slowly turned to face Belius. It would be natural as he was standing quite nearby. Was he hiding some guts? Lons regarded that heedless thought. Money, I'll give you money. 200 gold coins. No, 500 gold coins. It was a lot of money. However, doing that was the same as surviving a fall from a 500-meter cliff to receive the money. No one moved. No, there was one person. Half a person moved. Avavo. The right side of the knight that was split in two moved, while spitting out blood, and grabbed Belius' ankle. Ogya, aaaaa. Belius screamed. The bodies of the surrounding knights, and the villagers who saw this, their bodies stiffened. If it was Momonga, Ainz, he would not be surprised. Squire Zombie. Dying by the hands of a Death Knight would make you into its eternal servant. In Yggdrasil, the moment a Death Knight killed a monster, an undead of the same level would spawn at the same place. Those that knew the game Yggdrasil, it would be nothing to care about. But to those who did not, it would look like an act of the devil. Belius' screams stopped, and collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. He had probably lost consciousness. The Death Knight simply walked up to him, and stepped on his chest with its body armor. You could understand the force behind that leg just by looking. A clasp split open, and the metal creaked. Oh. The screams of Belius, who had just regained consciousness from the pain. Sabe me. Plebs. I'll do everything. His two hands tried desperately to remove the leg, but it would not budge from his chest. Money, I'll jibe you monai, sabe be. The screams of metal stopped, and the sounds of branches cracking reverberated, and blood flew into the air. Belius' screams, naturally, stopped. No. God. The screams of the knights, which had at one point stopped, began again at that scene. The moment you try to escape you would be killed. However, it is a fate worse than death. Such thoughts circulated, and their bodies did not move. Calm down. Lod's roar cut through the screams. Silence came upon them like time had stopped. Withdraw. Send out a signal to the mounted knights and archers. The remaining will buy some time for them to blow the horn. To those about to die, I'm sorry. Begin operation. The knights began at once. Depending on whether orders were inputted into their blank brains, they could think and perform perfectly. They would not be able to repeat if they failed after all. Originally, the number of knights that were holding the horn to contact the others numbered 3. Currently, there is only 1 remaining. They had to protect him. The knight several steps away threw down his sword, and started to take out the horn from the backpack he was carrying. Aaaaa. The Death Knight started running as if in response. Its same was the knight with the horn. It understood what they were doing, an action that showed its intelligence. The jet black bullet closed in as if flying. It was a bullet that would kill those that would dare to block its path. This was reflected in everyone's eyes. However, the knights still attempted to block it. A feeling stronger than fear forced them to move. With the wave of a shield, one knight was blown away. A sword flashed, and the top and bottom halves of another knight separated. Deason. Mallet. Hurry and cut the necks of the people killed by the sword. If you don't, they'll turn into monsters. The knights whose names were called frantically headed towards the corpses. Once again, the shield was swung, and another knight was blown away, and the sword that was received from above cleaved a knight in 2. Lons awaited the jet black storm to claim his own death as a martyr. Oh. And then, the flamberge was swung, and Lons' world spun around. He had lost his head, and his body collapsed beneath him. At the same time, the sound of a horn echoed. In a corner of the village, Heinz heard the horn and raised his head. He was engrossed in his experimentation. While reflecting, Heinz removed the sword lodged in his abdomen. He felt no pain. The part of his body that held the sword had no blood. It is as good as new. This was high-rank damage invalidation. When attacked by a weapon with little data or a low-ranked monster, the damage he was supposed to take will be invalidated. In Yggdrasil, it only applies to monsters level 40 or below, and thus was a useless ability. It was different in this world. I used to say that I was envious of that ability to reduce damage by 10 points. It was a cash item. Matilda, it could be said that he was also that type of person. Heinz looked down at his bony hand which still had a bit of skin, and put it inside the item box. He then took out a mask. It was the type that covered the entire face. The mask seemed like it was crying, or maybe angry. It had too much decoration. It looked like a Bali mask or maybe a Baron mask. Despite of its strange appearance, this item had no magic power. On the contrary, it was an event item in which you could not put in any data. What event was it? Christmas? Valentine's Day? The name of the mask was Mask of Envy. Had the creator gone mad? An entire article had been dedicated to it on the Yggdrasil thread on 2ch. He wore it. Next was the gauntlets. They were quite rough and boorish, and had nothing worth mentioning. Its name was Iron Graber. A member of Einzulgoen made it while playing around. It was a simple pair of gloves that increased physical strength. There was no particular reason as to why he chose these items. They only serve one purpose, and that was to hide his bony hands. Originally, he could have used illusion magic, yet he chose to hide it using items, but as those that can use illusion magic could see through it, there was no way that they will be tricked, thus a simpler method was used. If that happened and they saw his true appearance, he would have to come up with an excuse. Of course, this kind of trickery is nothing but sophism. Those who are tricked and those that are not have their own opinions, with their varying personal point of view. Sometimes, however, such sophisms can protect you, although lots of people would hate you for it. Anyway, with this was a level down from an evil monster to an evil magic caster. Probably. He was lost on what to do with the staff, so he just kept it like this. It was not much of a bother. Now, how should he hide his figure? Heinz's way of thinking was wrong. To Heinz, who was already used to the game Yggdrasil, the figure of his was not scary. However, to the residents of this world, he was the embodiment of fear. Since he was used to it and he did not notice the sentiment, it was a blunder. Honestly, he was a definite idiot. Why did he not notice that? It was fortunate that only those girls saw him. However, if you pray to God, then you probably shouldn't kill people. He was only able to spit out such words since he was an atheist, and looked at the praying corpse. Fly. Heinz lightly danced into the air. And then. Death Knight, if there are knights that are still alive, do not kill them. I have a use for them. He transmitted it with an accepting feeling. He was able to order his personally created undead mentally. He flew at high speed to where the horn was blown. Wind pressed against his body. He was probably moving at about 90 kilometers per hour? A speed impossible in Yggdrasil. The robe stuck to his body. He looked down at the village from midair, and saw a large part of an open space that is turning black, like the water being absorbed by soil. There were several corpses lying there, along with several shaking knights. And lastly, the standing Death Knight. Heinz breathed in and exhaled, then counted the number of knights that were still alive, although with moving difficulties. They numbered 4. More than necessary, it does not matter. Death Knight. That is enough. That voice in that place, it was completely too lackadaisical. A casualness like that of visiting a store, and asking the clerk for that thing you wanted. No, Heinz could not do any other but that. He had commanded it to kill them, but quite a few were beat up. If it was just to kill them, Heinz could do it easily. Anyone's words would have become lighter. Heinz, who was released from the chains of gravity, slowly landed on the ground. He looked at the surviving knights. Their lives were spared from a dangerous situation, but they did not understand, rather could not understand why. They were quite lightheaded. "Hello, gentlemen. I am Einzulgoen, the master of the great underground tomb of Nezarec." No one replied. They did not have the courage to do so, nor the energy. Heinz waited a little, and continued to speak. "I will guarantee your life if you surrender. If you still wish to fight." A sword was immediately thrown on the ground. More followed, And before long, 4 swords were quickly thrown down. You look tired. However, in front of the ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, your heads are a bit too high. The knights had no energy to resist his words. They quietly kneeled and bowed their heads. That was not the figure of subjects, but of prisoners. I shall permit you gentlemen to return. And then, tell this to your superiors, your masters. Ainz walked, and using the hand not holding the staff, knocked off the helm of one of the kneeling knights, and sternly stared at his tired face. While paying attention such that no one else can see, he moved his mask slightly, such that his skeletal face could be seen. The knights' eyes were muddled with fatigue and they wondered what they were looking at initially. Then they turned to surprise. 2 kilometers northeast of this village is a plain. There is a place called the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick there. I am its master. Therefore, the surrounding areas belong to me. If you make more trouble, I will massacre everyone in that bastard country of yours, understand? The knight's shaking head nodded repeatedly. Go. And remember to tell your masters. The knights immediately broke into a sprint and fled. Even if it's 1 second, they want to get away from there, their thoughts were obvious. Acting is tiring. Ainz said as he watched the figures of the knights grow smaller in the distance. If the villagers were not watching, he would have rotated his shoulders. Such a performance was quite troublesome for a member of society like Ainz. Especially since he did not have much dignity, he had no choice but to fake it. Meeting the face of the knight was also a part. His personality is impossible. However, his performance was not over yet, and he had to put on his mask again. Ainz began walking towards the villagers while wanting to sigh. He wanted to refuse to stand in such a bloody place, the smell will probably stick. Even though he did not feel anything from killing people, he still hated the smell. The fortunate thing was that the villagers did not make an issue of allowing the knights to escape. Clean up the squire zombies. While commanding the Death Knight in his mind, Ainz closed in on the villagers. Narrowing the distance, the faces of the villagers became confused and frightened. Their timid eyes wandered, and looked to and from the Death Knight. The reason they did not raise an objection was because of such a scary existence, and moving closer seemed to have the opposite effect. Thinking that, Ainz stopped, opened his mouth and spoke in a friendly tone. Now, are you okay? You are. A human that seemed to be the village representative opened his mouth. In the middle of it, the Death Knight behind him did not let his gaze leave him. It was quite an astonishing scene. Ainz laughed under his mask and replied. This village had seemed to be under attack, so I came to help. Oh. Buzzing. However, there were still people that still harbor suspicion. Anyway, it's not for free. I want money for every villager saved. The villagers looked at each other. They were poor, their faces showed it. However, their suspicion had died down. The typical aim of saving lives for money, it cleared up any doubt. It was because people could open their hearts to things that they could understand. Since the village is in this situation. Ainz raised his hand to cut off those words. Could we please have this discussion later? When I came earlier, I encountered and saved a pair of sisters. I will bring them here, so wait, okay? The two did not wish to close their mouths. Without waiting for the reply of the villagers, Ainz began slowly walking. Overlord First Half Chapter 10, Negotiations. The village chief's house was located right next to the village square and it was where the negotiations of the price of saving the villagers is taking place. Naturally, what Ainz wanted was not money but information. Even so, asking for information directly would be too suspicious. While it was true that receiving information from this small village was not a problem, the problem was afterwards. As long as there was not any information blockage, many people would learn about this incident. The chance of a powerful figure knowing this was, therefore, 100%. And when Ainz gets contacted by such a person, he'll know of Ainz's ignorance, which can be used against him during a negotiation. Is it foolish to be vigilant because of a mere unchecked possibility? Of course not. That was like crossing a road without checking first. That is how accidents occur. Strength is relative. Ainz is the strongest in this village. However, there are no evidences to prove that he is the strongest in the world. Hence, precaution must be taken. There might be beings that would be able to kill Ainz. Why, Ainz Ulgon is a guild that knows no defeat. He could not let the guild name be thrown into the mud. The sunlight that filtered in from the windows chased the shadows into the corner. Ainz moved his gauntlets on the shabby table and moved his arm like he was blocking out the sunlight. The table rattled, showing its poor quality. He placed the staff in the corner of the room to prevent it from being a bother. He recalled the surprised faces of the villagers. He did not think that it was good to stand out here. Because he did not rectify his Yggdrasil common sense, he had committed many blunders today. "I have made you wait." The man sat in the chair opposite. Behind him, a woman stood. The chief was about 40 years old. He was a man with wrinkled skin due to years under the sun. His build was very solid, and it was clear from a glance that he had worked hard in the fields. He had a lot of white hair, about half of his head was painted white. Probably the past 10 minutes had aged him more than his entire life, not that it was useful in any way. His clothes were made from cotton and were dirty and shabby, but they did not stink. Behind Ainz was a woman about the same age as the chief. She was probably a beauty when she was younger, but long years in the field had damaged her looks. Freckles spotted her face, and she was now a thin and skinny middle-aged lady. Her black hair was up to her shoulders and was frayed. Being tanned by the sunlight, she had a dark atmosphere surrounding her. "Please." The wife placed a shabby cup on the table. Steam rose up from the water, and danced in the air, but Ainz raised his hand in rejection. He was unable to recall the sense of thirst, and there was no way he could remove his mask. However, he still felt guilty about rejecting it. He wanted to apologize for causing her to do such a troublesome thing. Why, it was because of the process of boiling the water. Firstly, she had to strike a flint, and begin from starting a fire, and then stacking thin pieces of wood on top of the small flame, until it grew larger, and then move it to the hearth, and start the fire. It took a while until steam appeared. "I apologize for having you prepare this." "It was nothing. Please raise your head." Surprised at Ainz, who was lowering his head, the couple panicked. It was unbelievable that the owner of such monstrous strength would lower his head to villagers such as themselves. To Ainz, it was completely natural. While it was true that he was strong, they were negotiation partners. He could threaten them, but he judged it best to get on friendly terms with them. Naturally, because he had obtained information via magic, he had cast the highest-tier memory manipulation magic on the two sisters. However, that should be a last resort. If he used it often, his MP would eventually be consumed. So that was MP consumption? He felt fatigued, like he had lost something. The weight he felt was still heavy in his chest. Ainz grimaced. By altering his equipment with gauntlets and a mask, changing tens of seconds of memories felt like half of his MP was used. A huge loss. "Looks like I need to investigate the effects of magic. Now, I apologize for the suddenness, but shall we begin the negotiations?" "Yes." The chief gulped. Ainz worked his head at a high speed. Because the villagers were watching the knights, he could not use it, but if no one was around, he would have enjoyed using magic like Charm Person to answer his questions. However, in the end, it was impossible. So, he needed to gain information straight from other people. Troublesome. I will get straight to the point. How much money can I gain? Well, since the village is like this, most of what we can give you will be copper coins. Copper coins? He raised his surprised voice. That's a bit little. But, silver coins will be impossible. I see. Ainz nodded without saying anything. Copper and silver coins. These two were the foundation of the village's economy. The problem was the worth of a copper coin. How much would they be worth in Japanese yen? If he did not find this out, he would face a lot of troubles. When he went to towns and such, not knowing this would prove to be a huge problem. But if there were shops, he could check it out and face no problems. Even if he went to the city, he would still need to know basic information beforehand. What about silver coins? There should be some, right? No, we do not have any gold coins in this village. He had guided the conversation here, but the story conveniently unfolded before him. This man was quite fit to be the chief of the village. Or maybe the work of a village chief did not really exist. The image of a CEO which he had built up over a lifetime, had just crumbled in Ainz's mind. However, what if I buy stuff from you? It would have to be in copper coins. Gold and silver coins are. The chief went silent and shook his head. Then, what should we do? I am in no way a philanthropist. While acting like he was in deep thought, Ainz opened the item box. Inside was the coins of Yggdrasil, and he took two of them out. The first coin had the face of a woman engraved on it, the other a man's. The former was implemented with the supersized update The Loss of the Valkyria, and the latter was a coin from before that. The value was the same, but the sentimental values in each coin were different. The former was collected ever since Ainz had been in Ainzulgone, and quite a lot of the coins were accumulated. When the guild was at its peak, the update came, and by then, the guild members had already been used to tossing them the old coins into the item box. Hennet, does he meant that the old coins has been tossed into storage? Frostfire 10, yes. Ever since he was a skeleton mage, several pieces of coin floated in the air whenever he had defeated a monster. He had also entered a dungeon alone, and was attacked by an active monster and had gained a mountain of coins while frantically retreating. He shook off his nostalgia. Ainz finished playing with the old coin, and picked up the new one. I shall change the topic for a bit. If I want to purchase items using this coin, how much can I get for it? He placed the coin on the table with a clink. The chief and his wife both widened their eyes. This is a currency from long ago. Can I not use it? I believe you can, but please wait a moment. The chief left his seat, and went into his room, and brought out something. If he could say it in one word, it would be a balance scale. They took out a history book. From there, they tried to guess what coin it was. They somehow compared the sizes. Satisfied with that, they then placed the coin on the scale, and a weight on the other side. What was it again? Was it coin weighing? Ainz searched his memory for the processes happening before him. Firstly, they probably compared the size of his coin with the country's and then checked the weight. While watching, the side with the coin went down, and the weight went up. The couple placed another weight on the scale, and then the two sides seemed to balance. It weighs about twice as much as a normal coin. My eye scratched the surface for a little. Edie, you. Do not say such rude things. I truly apologize. My wife had made such a disrespectful. Enraged, the chief reprimanded his wife. Ainz understood the reason why he reproached her so strongly. I see, she thought that it was gold plating. He did not let his thought that he had learned something more important leak into his surroundings. I do not mind. Depending on the situation, I am fine even if you smash it apart, however, you will have to compensate for it. Making deals is naturally worrying. It is logical to check the goods in question. No, we truly are sorry. The wife lowered her head and returned the coin back to Ainz. She did not have to apologize to that extent, and Ainz felt a bit guilty. He recalled his own mother. A bit gloomy, a quiet mother. Because of that, he thought, he was a bit kinder towards her. It is fine. This is natural when you are making a deal. No, but to the person who had saved our village. I am not a person that would save a village for free. Basically, I am a trading partner. And so I do not mind. The eyes of the two showed their relief. It was not at the level of trust, but they seemed to have opened up to him a little. After seeing the gold coin, what do you think of it? It is like a work of art, right? Yes, it is really beautiful. Which country was this from? Now it is gone. Yes. It was a country that has long disappeared. I see. Would it be fine if I think of one of these is worth more than 2 of your gold coins? That may be so. But I am not a merchant, so appraising this work of art is a little. Ha ha ha. Matilda, that is true. While laughing, he returned the coin back to just before his eyes. The chief and his wife had the same stiff smiles that they had since the beginning. Ainz made the decision to move on to the next step. I actually have several of these coins, and could I use them as if they are worth 2 gold coins? He took out several pieces of gold coins from his robes, and dropped them onto the table, and a clear sound rang out. In the middle of that, Momonga was not looking at the table. Instead, from beneath his mask, he was watching the couple's expression with a serious look. I should be able to use these immediately, I just need to make change. Buying stuff with gold coins is quite painful. Naturally, feel free to inspect them, as you please. Please. No, thank you for your offer, but unfortunately we cannot afford such. Understood. His satisfied gaze left the troubled face of the village chief. Ainz put the coins in his hands, and returned them into his robes. Now, let us return to the reward. I shall speak frankly and get to the point. How much can you give me? The same question as earlier. However, the reply was returned more smoothly than before. Ainz-sama, honestly this village has lost most of its workforce. While it is true that we can give enough money to satisfy you. However, we have to worry about the season changes, and so it will be difficult to prepare much. How about supplies? Supplies will be the same. Well, As our population has decreased, we are currently short-handed. It is probable that if we give you supplies now, in future, we will become extremely poor. Fumu. Ainz acted like he was in deep thought. Everything up to here was fine. He could only pray for what happens afterward. He let a bit of time pass, and replied, I understand. I do not require a reward. Oh. Due to the chief and his wife's surprise, their eyes widened. Ainz raised his hand, in an appeal to continue. I am a magic caster of the great underground tomb of Nazarick located about 10 kilometers northeast of here. Recently, I have come out. Oh, was that the case? However, I thought that was mostly plains? By my magic. I see. The chief leaked out a voice of admiration. Next to him, his wife nodded her head. He let his negotiation partner come to a selfish understanding by leaving parts left unsaid. But, there was a possibility of doing a bad job and make it troublesome, but nothing else could be done. So, your appearance is that of a magic caster? Yes, Matilda, something like that. While touching the mask of envy, Ainz spoke vaguely. Did the magic casters of this world really have such suspicious appearances? Or did they think so because of ignorance? Ignorance is really convenient. He took advantage of it. Has the chief seen magic casters apart from me? Yes. Long ago, when I was a child. When the village was visited by some adventurers, there was one robed figure among them. I believe he was called a magic caster. Ho, then have you seen magic such as mine? No, while it is unfortunate, I have not. They immediately left the village afterwards. It seems that they came for the rare medical herb in the forest. What about my mask? He spoke in a way that could have been mistaken for a laugh. The chief made an expression that he was recalling the past. It was almost like he wanted to forget about the present. No, I have not seen such a mask. However, it gives off a strange atmosphere. I remember feeling fear-like from when I was a child. I see. Fear is a good tool. When everyone saw my subordinate, they thought that as well, right? The chief and his wife redirected their line of sight towards a latticed window. Ainz sets his sight there slightly later. From the cracks in the window, several residents were putting away the corpses in the village square, and standing rigidly further away was the figure of the Death Knight. In Yggdrasil, the Death Knight should disappear after 100 minutes, however it was still standing there. Ainz felt a little doubtful, but he put it aside. Although I said that I do not need a reward, he watched their reactions. Magic casters use a lot of various things as tools. Fear, knowledge. It is, so to speak, tools of our trade. However, I currently have a lack of information. And so, I would like to acquire such information. Furthermore, I would like the fact that I am buying information to be kept secret. I will take this in place of a monetary reward. I do not need anything. No such convenient words exist. It just means that nothing expensive will be requested. People are scared of things they do not understand. During negotiations for the reward for saving the villagers, money is not necessary. Even not the sharpest of people would feel something off about it. If that was the case, it was fine to sell something which could not be seen. Basically they were selling tools of his trade to Ainz. If they thought that it was an equivalent exchange, no one will feel suspicious. And they would feel relieved that they are equals. The chief and his wife took up serious expressions and nodded. I understand, I will not ever reveal this to anyone. I as well. I shall believe you. He extended his gauntlet-clad hand. The chief made a startled face, changed to an understanding one and gripped his hand. Ainz was relieved that there were handshakes. If he saw eyes that asked what he was doing, he could do nothing but cry. While there was trust, it was not serious. If this was a business, information would flow from business and flow from human nature. If the chief keeps his promise, then no information would leak from him. If it did, then he would do this. The next time he came to the village, he would make an effective card to play. Although he somehow felt that he would not be betrayed. There were reasons, of course. If they are greedy, then they would jump at the chance to exchange stuff for the gold coins. Secondly, when he dropped the large amount of 2 gold coins on the table, they had a surprised look, but their eyes were not blinded by greed. In addition, the chief's wife was very much like his dead mother. A mother Kanha. Troubled, Ainz smiled from behind his mask. However, no one was able to see his smiling face, which was a bit of a waste. Also, ever since he came to this world, he was kinder than before. Although skeletal. Even so, It is strange that you would still choose to associate with someone who has a monster like me. Magic casters make fear into weapons. I have heard that before. And one of the people among the 13 heroes is a necromancer. That person really is terrifying. Ho, the 13 heroes? Power burned in Ainz's eyes. He had heard another important piece of knowledge. He needed to learn more in detail. Ainz wrote that in the memo in his heart, and closed it. Overlord first half chapter 11, Knowledge. What the hell was that? Exclamation mark. What is it? Has something happened? Ah, no, something personal. My apologies. I have bothered you. Immediately, Ainz, who had just made the sudden outburst, returned to his usual facade. If he had a human body, he would probably be perspiring. The chief looked bewildered, and then immediately returned to his former expression. Already, inside the chief's head, magic casters are strange people, or maybe he had become slightly different from one. Was that unexpectedly fortunate? Ainz thought about it. Shall I prepare more beverages? Ah, no, I am fine. He raised his hand in rejection of the chief's question. Steam no longer rose from the cup of hot water which the chief's wife prepared earlier. Ainz had not touched it with his mouth nor hand. If she had prepared any more he would have felt bad. The wife was not inside this room. She had work outside, various cleaning to do, and left. There were only the chief and Ainz inside this room. After placing the staff of Ainz Ulgun inside the item box, the first thing he heard about was the surrounding countries. And the answer to that was the names of countries he had never even heard of. At first, Ainz felt various feelings of discomfort, as he was still basing things on the world of Yggdrasil. Because he could use magic of Yggdrasil, it was the natural thing to do. However, he had learned about places of which he had never even heard of. Names are like the Baharuth Empire and Riestai's kingdom were not found in Norse mythology which were used in the game of Yggdrasil. His vision spinning, he grabbed the table with his gauntlets to support his body that was about to collapse. It was possible to understand, but it was still difficult. And then the shock was bigger than he had thought. Ainz calmed down, and recalled the surrounding countries and geography that he had learned. First was the Baharuth Empire and the Riestai's kingdom. They were separated by a mountain range. South was a large forest that cut through the mountain range. And where it ended, was this village and a fort city. A fort city, which was built to withstand sieges. Actually, the empire seemed to have a skirmish several times in an attempt to capture it. Actually, the empire was building a position near the fort city. There were rumors that a war might occur again soon. And even further south of the fort city was another country. The slain theocracy. Explaining the territories of the countries, if you drew a circle, they would form an inverted T-shape. On the left was the Riestai's kingdom, the right was the Baharuth Empire, and the bottom would be the slain theocracy. There were other countries, but that was the limit of the chief's knowledge. In addition, the chief of such a small village would not know anything about their military might. Basically, that was a failure. There was a chance that the knights earlier were from the slain theocracy. It was possible that their strategy was to incite a war with the kingdom by causing trouble in the villages bordering the forest. He was wrong to let all of the knights go. He should have captured several of them to extract information. He had calmed down, but not thinking that far was stupid of him. While thinking about the slain theocracy, he should do something about the empire. Ainz thought. What would happen if he was the only one that came to this world? If there were 1 or 2 players, there would be no problem. The Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick had enough battle potential to rival 30 level 100 players. If he included his cache items, Ainz could probably fight 2 or more. At first, it is good to think that fighting would be dangerous. However, Ainz was not that childish so as to act without thinking about the worst possible case. It is best to think about the problem and the solution from the start. If relations were good, then he need not think of ways to prevent this. He would think about the countermeasures when the time comes. The problems were the guild with Asgard's flying castle, the guild with the frozen palace in the deepest part of Helheim, and the guild that owned the field which spawned fire giants in Muspelheim. These 3 guilds rivaled Ainz Ulgun. If this guild came, it would be beneficial if they began a friendly relationship. However, if that was not the case, he did not know how many guild members were left. And there were several people who could easily rival himself. It was important to behave such as to prevent any future hostilities. On the other hand, knowledge of their war potential needed to be gathered. If there were Yggdrasil players in large quantities, whether united, or separate due to their personal interests, It would be good if he was able to get along with other Japanese players. At that time, he would also want to join them. If they had no relations to Ainzulgon, he could assist them without limit. The problem was if that group saw him as an enemy. While he thought that it was impossible, he could not say that the possibility did not exist. Firstly, they could be targeted by other players by their sense of justice or for righteousness. To avoid this, Momonga himself needed to avoid antagonistic actions, for example, attacking the surrounding areas. If he massacred people or made bad decisions, there was a chance that it would upset other players. Of course, there may be other reasons to form an alliance with him. However, it may be for something like assisting in the capture of villages like this. Basically, as long as their actions from now on were for a good cause, it would be convenient. Basically, although I did not want to do it, I had no other choice. Next was the possibility that they held a grudge against Ainzulgon. They would probably not be able to avoid a fight. Defensive measures will be necessary. This is a problem for a later. And there was the choice of shutting himself within the great underground tomb of Nezarec. It is not difficult to imagine how stupid it would be to conduct a siege without reinforcement. So I was not wrong, huh? Did something happen earlier? No, it was nothing. I just thought that things were a little different. I apologize. More importantly, can you tell me about coins? Yes, I understand. The chief placed several copper coins on the table. Trade of currency, trade. The symbol of the god of business is a wheel, and so one side is a wheel. The other side has the carved symbol of the merchant guild. While they had no gold coins, he had let Ainz see the copper coins. Ainz flipped the coins over to see if there were any engravings. And going back to an earlier topic, the conversion rate of the coins. As an abbreviation, let us call them gold coins. This was the most trusted expensive coin by the merchant guild in circulation. It weighed 10 grams. Weight mattered more than the size to the price, but its diameter was 30 millimeters. Coins were separated into copper, silver, gold and platinum, and about 1/4 of the copper coins were made from brass. Platinum coins were rarely used. And the chief and his wife had never seen one in their entire life. Basically only merchants and nobles used them. The conversion rate for the coins was 1,000 copper equals 100 silver equals 10 gold equals 1 platinum. If you converted the price of a copper coin into Japanese yen, it would be about 1,000 yen. One gold coin is equivalent to 100,000 yen. It was the basic wage of 1 day of work for a craftsman, about 1 silver coin. Farmers would earn less, about 6 copper coins. That means prices are expensive. A cup made of ceramic would cost about 2 copper coins. On the other hand, food is cheap. When primary industries are cheap, secondary industries are expensive. Ainz was relieved. His feelings of being a financial burden were relieved. Yggdrasil currency of 1G would seem to be about 1 billion. It seems that there was no need to touch the treasures that his friends have left behind. While it may seem that 1 gold was a lot of money, top-class weapons in Yggdrasil's player shop were at least 100 million. And if something was over enchant data, not even 1 gold could buy anything. Several of the items that Ainz was using were worth more than 1 gold. Monsters also existed. Numerous magical beast exists in the heart of the Great Forest along with demi-humans such as elves and goblins. The demi-humans had made a country of their own. There were people known as adventurers that repelled monsters. It seemed that quite a few were magic casters. Of course, the chief have not seen them in person, and he had only heard of their feats from visiting merchants. However, if Momonga himself went to large cities, he would be able to find them in the adventurer guilds. And so he wanted to learn more about the fort city. This fort city. While the chief did not know the exact figures, the population of the walled city was quite substantial. Since the city is situated in an area which is bordering 3 countries, it was built to withstand sieges and the city never changed hands till this day. If they were collecting information, this was probably the best. Ainz decided as such. And lastly, it was something to laugh at. But if this was the world of Yggdrasil, it would not be strange if Japanese existed. This was because it was a Japanese game. Therefore, in a completely foreign world, it was weird that Japanese language could be easily understood. And so, Ainz watched the mouth movements of the chief, but the funny thing was that he was not speaking Japanese. The movements of the mouth did not match the sounds coming out of it. From that he wanted to perform several experiments. At first the chief had made a dubious face, but when told that the magic experiments were harmless, he agreed. In conclusion, This world had eaten translation Konyaku. No one knew who had fed it to them. Rather than using a language, it would translate the words to the partner's own language automatically. For example, in net terminology, there are words such as WKTK. Old men that do not use the net would probably not understand it, right? No way they would. However, in this world they could. It was because it conveyed the essence of words. It was not an exaggeration to say that it is the implication of words that is conveyed. It felt like at the same time as the mouth speaks, the meaning will be conveyed telepathically. If words are recognized as words, humans would probably be able to communicate with animals. For example, dogs and cats. The problem was that why the heck was it happening? And then it was not something strange to the chief. That was completely natural. Basically it is one of the world's laws. If you thought about it calmly, magic, the rules of entropy completely did not exist in this world. In fact, it would not be strange if the world functioned on completely different laws. The problem was that only Ainz did not know much of the laws that govern this world. For example, it is a hot midsummer day, and you were about to enter a McDonald's, and the man in front of you bought a Coca-Cola. And then he left the building. Your ice melted, would you notice it? There is no way that you will notice it. That was a natural occurrence which guided by the rules of nature. And so if a magic caster goes out into the world that hid his ability for a month, and Ainz goes out, who would pay attention? There was no way anyone would. Why? It was completely natural. It was a stupid reason but understandable. In addition, the important thing is that if there was no such thing as common sense, mistakes would be made. The current Ainz was lacking it. He had to do something. However, he had no good ideas. Should he bring back someone and get them to spit out all of their common sense? Reckless. There was only one way to get it. Looks like I really have to go to the city. He needed a lot of good examples to learn about common sense. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. It was something that humans of the past can fully appreciate. He needed to learn about this world's relation with magic. There were still a lot of things that he needed to find out. While Ainz was thinking, the sound of soil being stepped on came from the direction of the thin wooden door. It did not seem too far away. The man probably was not in a hurry. The same time that Ainz had faced the door, a knock echoed through the room. The chief looked towards Ainz for his response. He had no reason to refuse. I do not mind. My apologies. The chief lightly bowed his head, stood up, and walked to the door. When the door opened, a single villager was standing there. He looked first at the chief, then at Ainz. Chief. While I understand that you are with a guest, but preparations for the funeral are completed. Oh. The chief sent his sight towards Ainz as if requesting for permission. Naturally, Ainz made no signal to stop him. I do not mind. Thank you very much, tell everyone that I will head over immediately. Understood. As the village left and shut the door, the chief faced Ainz and lowered his head. I truly apologize. I have to handle the funeral, so please give me a bit of time. I understand, I have something to request of you. But I would like to discuss it with everyone in the village. In the end, he did not learn about anything related to the 13 heroes. Overlord First Half Chapter 12, Departure. The mass funeral was held in the cemetery, at the outskirt of the village. There were no gravestones. Only boulders with the deceased names etched on them. The chief led the funeral by reciting prayers for the dead. His prayers as to the names of gods that was not found in the game of Yggdrasil, wishing to them to allow the departed to rest in peace. Due to a shortage of available hands, not all the corpses were buried. This was the first round of funerals. Ainz stood away from the villagers and watched. Among the village congregation were the figures of the two sisters that he saved, Enri and Nemuamet. They had a sort of calm and relieved look on their face at the end. They were probably recalling their parents' faces. That man, huh? Ainz was grasping a 30 centimeters long wand underneath his robes. The wand was made from elephant tusk and the front end of the wand was gold-plated. The remaining portion was the grip and it was decorated with numerous runes. Overall, the wand gave off the feeling of a holy artifact. Wand of Resurrection. The wand is an item that possesses the ability to resurrect the dead. Naturally, Ainz did not own just one. Even after resurrecting all the villages, he will still have quite a lot of the wands remaining. However, the village chief mentioned that no magic can resurrect the dead in this world. If Ainz uses the wand, he would most likely make a miracle. The funeral approached the end of the prayer session and Ainz slowly returned the wand back inside his item box. Ainz can easily resurrect the dead. However, He did not do so. This is not because of any religious sentimentality, but because he thinks that there is no benefit to it. A magic caster that can bring death and a magic caster that can revive the dead. It won't be hard to imagine which one will bring more troubles to him. Although he could have requested the villagers to keep his ability a secret as per terms of resurrection, he doubts that this can be kept a secret for long. The power to resist death. It was something that everyone would yearn for. If there are any changes to the situation, he might do it, but there was currently too little information. Basically, he was watching lives that he could save being thrown away for his sake. Underneath the mask, Ainz displayed a ridiculing smile. He saw Nemu and Henry crying loudly. Ainz was walking on the small path that leads to the outside of the village. The Death Knight followed him from behind. Although he was interrupted by the funeral ceremony, he had used quite some time to learn more of the common knowledge of this world and news about his surroundings. By the time he had left, the sky was darkening. Now, I will be leaving. Ainz-sama. Please come to the village again. This time we will properly thank you. No, that will be unnecessary. If Chief Dono still has some stuff and brings it to my place, it will be a lot of help. Naturally, next time it will be money. Understood. Then until that time. The smiling village chief shook hands with Ainz by grasping his metal gauntlet. It seems that he had already warmed up to him. Ainz was content by the village chief's warm hospitality and began walking. Leaving the chief's house, there was a villager with a determined look on her face. Ainz's eyes widened beneath his mask. He did not think that this girl would come again. There was Henry Amat. Is it fine? Yes. Have you ridden a horse before? Yes. At the corner of the village square were two of the captured horses from the knights. One of the horses were carrying luggage while the horse was armored. However, why are people with riding experience plentiful in this village? Long ago, someone from this village participated in a war. As a reward for good service, many goods were provided. Among them were horses. He taught the children how to ride them. Thus many children in this village are capable of riding horses. When he asked the chief, he immediately responded. I see. From among several people gathered, he had chosen her. Although it was harsh to hear, she was chosen because her death will not affect the village the most. Men could be used to rebuild the village. When compared to a young girl who lost both of her parents, there was a difference. Then as promised, 200 gold coins. Ainz gave a leather sack, given by the chief, which contains gold coins to Henry. The sack weighed 4 kilos. Henry opened the sack to confirm the contents before passing it to the chief. Please do. Okay. The chief solemnly nodded and Ainz opened his mouth in continuation. Please rest assured. If you do not return, I promise that I will bring you to see your sister about once a year. Chief Dono, that is acceptable, right? Yes. Understood. 200 gold pieces. It will be a huge sum to the villages if it reaches 400 gold pieces. To a pair of orphan sisters, the sum was required for their long-term living maintenance. Of course the sum will be a bit much if the elder sister dies, leaving behind the growing younger sister. This is worrisome to the Ainz, who greeted them. He breathed a sigh of relief and Henry's shoulders relaxed. Ainz put the goatskin parchment written by the chief into the scroll case. I will be in your care. Yes. Henry received the scroll case and placed it on her hip. Then, I will be leaving. A lot of thanks for various things, Chief Dono. No, I as well, thank you very much. Ainz-sama. No one in this village will forget what you have done for us. The chief bowed deeply as he waved goodbye, and Ainz responded. At that, Henry bowed her head in a panic. Henry walked towards the two horses. That is Matilda, not much need for that. The two arrived in front of the horses. Ainz took out 2 small horns from his infinity haversack. These were magic items that were previously prepared during the return from the funeral. It had no distinguishing features, normal horns. However, each horn has magic that is capable of summoning a goblin troop. It was an item that could summon 12 level 8 goblins, 2 level 10 goblin archers, 1 level 10 goblin mage, 1 level 10 goblin cleric, 2 level 10 goblin riders and wolves, and 1 level 12 goblin leader, a horn that was easily for sale. Since they were weak yet numerous, they would be a bother while hunting, and so it was not used. Since it was dangerous, it was listed on 2ch as a dangerous item. This item, when blown, summons monsters for about 1 hour. If something occurs, you can give orders to the monsters summoned from this horn. If your work is finished and you still have not used it, You can keep it if you like. Thank you very much. Henry examined the items several times, then placed it within her pockets. Then she observed Ainz with a strange expression. What is it? Why, you really are the one that came to save us, right? What do you mean? You, It might have been a different person with the same mask. Ainz only inserted the memory of him appearing in a mask and gauntlet when he modified the sisters' memories. The remaining portion were left untouched. But Ainz made a weird motion with magic, and made a face like he missed something. However, he felt lethargic when he heard her words. That tone of voice is. Ha! It is basic to change your way of speaking when talking to different people, normally. He used the same scary voice as earlier and Henry jumped in shock. I truly apologize. Ah, it's fine. I'm not particularly mad. Ainz grasped the bowing Henry and forced her up. Many villages that were waiting outside were hoping that Ainz will forgive Henry. The hand that was grasped by the gauntlets probably hurt. Henry rubbed the part of her hand that Ainz had grasped. I will be praying for your safe return. Yes. She was heading towards one of the Empire's stronghold within the region. The chief mentioned that the Empire constantly attacked the village. The reason Henry was headed there was to convey the foolishness of the Empire's actions and to announce the annihilation of the Knights by Ainz. It was to inform the Empire about the existence known as Ainz. One was the issue of the Knights that he spared. It is likely that because of his own decision, news of him will undoubtedly spread around in the nearby areas. However, he felt that it is better for him to regulate the news of him that was being spread. Since he had saved several knights, he might be able to get a favor. However, it was not clear which country the knights were from. Why was this so? It was because it will be hard to suppress the spread of information about him. Without information about this world, it will be dangerous for him to act rashly. It might be a better tactic for him to hide himself and covertly gather intelligence. However, he had saved the village, and so he could not do it. Even if I annihilate the attacking knights, the country that sent them will most likely send someone to investigate the matter. Like the scientist from my world, they might be capable of using investigative magic. Even though there might not be strong investigative magic, an investigation on the surviving villagers will bound to happen. By then, how will the kingdom think of him? Considering the assumption to reduce information leakage, it might be a good idea to bring all the villagers back to Nazarick. But from the kingdom side, this can be considered as a kidnapping. How about being saved by a traveling magic caster? A magic caster that can easily kill off the knights. What will be the evaluation of him by each country then? No matter which side, if they investigated Ainz, they may reduce his punishment if he surrendered himself voluntarily. Among the three countries, kingdom, empire, theocracy, which one should Ainz choose to hide himself? If a Yggdrasil player is present, information of him or her will surface. Ainz will need some time to gather information. Of course, if he wanted to go into the town, they could brainwash people into thinking that Demiurge is a merchant. However, the risks are abundant. There was a chance of making needless enemies. And so joining a country for information contains the most merits. And for the sake of preserving the autonomy of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, it would be good to have a shield of authority to hide behind. Ainz did not look down upon the strength of a country. This was further spurred on by the fact that they did not know the limit to the strength of an individual. There was a chance that there was a person stronger than Ainz in the three countries. If it comes to a battle which both sides having similar strength, he will not desist. If there was an existence that was level 10,000 in one country, then another country should have someone that can rival him. Which country should he choose? It would be a decision that would bring both many demerits and merits. The problem was what sort of position he should take. He would like to destroy the slave-like positions if there were any. Also any black-hearted companies. And so he would like to appeal for an existence with lots of influence. He would support the most suitable person. This is common knowledge in the working world. Originally Ainz going there himself would be faster. However, it was not known how the talks would turn out. And the war potential too was unknown. The one that accepts the job knows that risk of the task is high. They must prepare to face their own death. That was Henry's job. With that 200 gold coins, he had bought the life of Henry. Ainz-sama, thank you for saving us. Henry bowed respectfully to Ainz. Ainz wanted to vomit because of his disgust of gambling the life of a cute young girl. If it was Ainz, he could maybe use transportation magic to escape, but other magic probably would do. Back to the great underground tomb of Nazarick and bring out monsters. However, that was because the opponent was not being cautious. The only reason why he sent a young girl was because it would be easier to read the opponents. Are you, really fine? Question mark. If you go, you may not be able to come back. You understand that, right? There was the option of having no one go. I was not really forceful, so why? Without money we have no way to live. Henry replied calmly. Heinz fought hard to suppress his invisible tears that is welling at the corners of his eyes. Because my two parents have died, and the village is in this situation. It would be terrible if you saw us as troublesome. And so Heinz summed his words, to us they were a saving grace. I may not have to do this, but I may not be able to carve out a living using only what my parents left behind. That may be so. Or maybe not. If you own a sum of money of 200 gold coins, then you should be fine, right? An outsider would probably say that. Heinz would do the same. However, seeing the girl's eyes, a human that could say those words did not exist. Heinz understood the urge to prove that she is worth every penny paid. This is not a game. One cannot see the gold pieces as a game currency anymore. People are willing to risk their lives just for a small sum of gold. Feeling lightheaded, Heinz put strength in his legs. She understood that her life did not mean much. Heinz reminded himself to cast aside his doubts. His action of extending a helping hand to the adorable children was the right option. Heinz moved his sight. Under the shadow of one of the houses in the village square was Henry's younger sister, Nemu. The farewell had ended, but she was staring at her sister with a lonely expression. This could be her last farewell to her sister. Under Heinz's observation, he knew that she is trying hard to carve this memory into her mind. Why won't she cry? Why won't they say farewell at a closer distance? Why will she not hate Heinz that is sending her sister on a dangerous mission? Heinz does not know. But take this with you. Heinz took out a scroll from the infinity haversack. This is? It is a scroll that allows you to return to a specific location. Once invoked, you can directly return here. However, its function is yet to be confirmed. It might not work at all. If you face any complications that you are not able to overcome with the horn, use the scroll. Thank you. After the completion of the task, do visit my home. I will prepare a feast for you. Yes. Will it be all right if I bring my sister along? Of course. I will be waiting for your arrival. I am sure my friends will understand. The Great Underground Tomb of Nezarec. Entry is forbidden to any outsiders. As Heinz watches Henry's departure, he silently hoped that she will be the first guest of the tomb. At the same time, his heart is thinking of something foolish. What are the most important things to him? Do not make a mistake on that. Think clearly. It is just like a curse. Overlord First Half Chapter 13, The Warrior Captain of the Kingdom. Heinz watched Henry as she left the village. With that, everything he needed to do here has been completed. The spoils of armor and swords had been collected and placed inside the infinity haversack. Nothing was left behind. Anything that happens after this will be the village's problem. Only the dead and the injured remained. Precaution will not be needed because it is bothersome. But, what should he do about her sister? The best thing to do would be until she comes back, he should leave some monsters nearby. It will be best if he would contact and discuss this with Demiurge. His underlings are best suited for this type of work. Heinz decided that he needed to say some parting words to the chief, and so looked for him the village square. At one corner of the square, several surviving villages seemed to be discussing something with serious expressions. Heinz felt that some of them have decided on several decisions. As Heinz walked closer, he felt the sense of foreboding getting stronger. The atmosphere changed, and felt tense. Has something happened? Chief Dono. People that seem like warriors are currently approaching on horseback. I see. The village chief looked at Heinz with a pleading expression. It was the same from the other villagers. Heinz understood the meaning behind their actions. He raised his hands gently to calm the villagers. Please leave it to me. Please assemble the remaining people in Chief Dono's house. Chief Dono and I will be at the open space. The bell sounded and villagers gathered at the chief's house. Heinz ordered the Death Knight to stand guard nearby. Heinz tried to smile at the nervous chief. Obviously due to the mask, his smile went unnoticed. Do not worry. This time will be special and I will save you for free. The chief smiled bitterly. But, his trembling had lessened considerably. He might be hungry too. Soon, a number of riders appeared at the central road leading towards the square. They fell into formation and moved into the square silently. Fumu. Ainz developed a sense of foreboding after looking at the knight's equipment. The previous knights bearing the Empire's emblem have matching sets of equipment. Although the new arrivals were armored, the sets of armor doesn't match after comparing them to the former. There is a huge difference, with some wearing leather armor while others bear metal armor. Some do not even have helms. The similarity of each helm is that the face of the wearer is exposed. Each of them held various weapons, a sword with a common design, others carried bows, a one-hand spear, and even maces. If you say it nicely, they can be considered as a group of veterans. On the other hand, they can be called a group of mismatched mercenary group. Not long after, all of them reached the village square. A total of 14 riders. A few of them were wary of the Death Knight. They formed a perfect line in front of Ainz and the chief, and one of the riders moved towards them. There were no phrases to describe his strong physique. His build was like steel. He looks young, approximately 30 years old. With a stone-edge face, he might be older than expected. The hair was trimmed neatly and he radiated a strong sense of danger. The man's gaze swept over the chief and stopped at the Death Knight. After confirming that it was not moving, he switched his sight to Ainz. The air seems to simmer with a violent tension. But Ainz seemed to ignore him nonchalantly. He displayed the air of an expert. Of course, this is not because Ainz cannot detect the intense gaze directed at him. I haven't felt the sense of fear ever since I had this body. Or is it because I can use my abilities in Yggdrasil that I am confident? I am, from the Riesti's kingdom, the kingdom's warrior captain, Gazef. Receiving orders from the king to repel knights from the Baharuth Empire that are causing trouble here, we have been patrolling the villages. The voice that is deeper than what was expected from his looks, reverberated in the square. A commotion seemed to have broken out from the chief's house. The kingdom's warrior captain. Ainz leaned towards the chief and whispered quietly into his ear. What sort of person is he? I have heard from merchants. It is a position obtained from winning the kingdom's tournament, the person in command of the best warriors of the king. Ho, is this true? I do not know. I do not know about him except from stories. Ainz observed the group of knights. The kingdom's crest was carved on their chest. It is the same as what the chief described. But still, not many were convinced. You must be the village chief. Gazef's line of sight moved to the chief. I would like you to tell me who the heck is the person right next to you. Nice to meet you, Kingdom's warrior Captain Dono. I am Ainz Ulgon, a magic caster that came to save the village when it was attacked by knights. Before the chief can reply, Ainz introduced himself ceremoniously, followed with a slight bow towards the warrior chief. In reply, Gazef lowered his head. I do not have words to express my gratitude for saving this village. No. Actually, I saved this village for a reward, so please do not mind. Then please excuse me, but what sort of people had attacked the village? I would like to hear about this in detail. I do not mind, but what about Chief Dono? No, I do not mind as well. Then let's hear it. I do not mind, but it would be good to explain fully, but it cannot drag on. Shall we take a seat and talk? Fumu, there's a reason, but most of the knights were killed. By my simple opinion, it is likely that they will not attack here again. I would like to make this clear. I see. As Gazef went into deep thoughts, his gaze once again paused at the Death Knight. Did he smell the faint traces of blood? That is, a subordinate that I had created. Ho! Gazef's sharp gaze observed every inch of Ainz carefully. Then that mask is something due to my position as a magic caster. Could you remove it? I will have to refuse. That, he pointed to the Death Knight, will be bad if it rampages. The chief made a worried face as he knew the power of the Death Knight. And then Gazef heard the voices of the villagers inside the chief's house. He felt their expressions change quickly, and so he nodded. I see. It would be best not to remove it then. Thank you very much. Then. Before that, I apologize, but the villagers were just attacked by knights from the Baharuth Empire, and so I think that the villagers will recall their fear from the fact that everyone is carrying weapons. And so I believe that it would calm everyone down if you could leave your weapons in the center of the village. That is logical. However, this sword was bestowed upon me by the king. I cannot remove it unless it is the king's order. Ainz-sama. Chief Dono. The chief nodded towards Ainz. That is something irrefutable. I truly apologize for that. Asking you to remove it. No, Ainz Dono. I believe that your thoughts were extremely correct. Had it not been given to me by the king, I would have happily put it down. Now, let us take a seat and talk about this in detail. Understood. To my house then. Umu. Then all you guys help out around the village. Ha. The soldiers lining up behind agreed. After the villagers left, the trio, which consisted of the chief, Ainz and Gazef, went inside the house to discuss the details of the incident. The warriors went to work each on their own. Time for them to get busy. There are many things that needed to be done. For example, one of families were completely wiped out. Any remaining scenes from that tragedy was not permitted to linger. Hence, alchemical oil will be used. The dismantling work was necessary. Henceforth, it is required that all the belongings in the house to be removed first. The work required quite some effort. The warriors had to remove their armor, before using their limited individual strength to remove all the valuables. The job will proceed faster if they just chuck the valuables. But, these belongings is to be shared among the survivors as their owners are deceased. Hence, careful treatment is required. They worked diligently. Several houses needed to have their valuables transferred. Fresh graves needed to be dug in order for the funeral to proceed. Demonic presence might infect the corpses if left unattended, allowing for undead to rise. Undead. They were monsters that move although they had lost their lives. They were quite common at battlefields. However, they may also appear in various tragic scenes from bodies that were left unattended. Zombies, skeletons and ghouls are the more famous of them. The early completion of burials is vital to prevent such a phenomenon from occurring. The village had its own funeral rites. They first dug a hole, and could do nothing but leave the body inside. As everyone was busy with work, the Death Knight that was standing guard beside the chief's house was being examined by 3 warriors. Like, this guy is huge. One of the warriors touched the Death Knight. The leather which separates the metal portions of the armor is cold to the touch. From the talk of the villagers, this guy killed many of the Empire's knights. Wow. Really? But, since it's huge, its movements should be slow. That's true. But, does it really move? Looks like nothing but a corpse to me. Who knows? Matilda, it looks good enough as a shield. Pointing towards the large shield on the left hand, the warriors began to laugh. That due to their self-confidence. As a matter of fact, within the kingdom, the 180 people that formed the core of the kingdom's elite knights were the cream of the crop. They were the most trusted group of the king. Their ability enabled them to go one-on-one with the knights of the empire and gain an easy victory. Warrior Sama, if you anger it you might die. A teenager of the village told them from afar. The 3 knights looked at each other and laughed again. Ha, it's fine. It's fine. We are the elite warriors of the kingdom. Don't stand so far away and come here. Even if it rampages we will protect you. A red fire seemed to appear within one of the empty eye sockets of the Death Knight, staring at the warriors. The young boy who saw it ran away immediately. Oi, what's wrong bozo? Awa. The youngster pointed towards the Death Knight and the knights followed the child's finger. There was no red light. Only a sleeping corpse remained. What happened? The knights looked at the direction of the youngster, whom had already ran away. Looking at the youngster that decided to flee and hide at home, the knights laughed. It really is scary, this huge thing. Yup. Its appearance really looks scary. And that face. However, magic casters that can use necromancy, one was a part of the 13 heroes. What's that? Don't know. They were amazing heroes from the past. I heard it in class, but I forgot their names. Fun. But it's impossible for that weird masked guy to be a hero. Once again, the laughter of those 3 spread around the square. Still, the Death Knight remained dormant. It was indeed scary. I see. After taking a gulp from the cup of lukewarm water, Gazef opened his mouth. He remained quiet and nodded occasionally as Ainz and the chief recapped the events. I said it earlier but, Ainz don't know. You have my gratitude for saving this village. No, I have said it earlier but I was searching for a reward. If modesty goes too far, it sounds like sarcasm. Gazef sent a beast-like gaze towards Ainz, and then faced the chief. Could you let me see the armor that the knights were wearing? Sure. Noticing the meaningful gaze from the chief, Ainz opened the infinity haversack. He took out a piece of armor, one which had the least damage. He placed the section with the emblem closer to Gazef so that he can examine it. Gazef was momentarily taken aback by how such an armor can be taken out from such a small bag, but immediately rectified it. Chief Dono, is this the right one? Yes, there is no mistake. Nodding grimly, Gazef received the armor with both hands. He examined it closely, flipped it, and also gave it a slight knock. Not long after coming to his conclusion, he placed the armor on the table. This really is the Empire's armor. Looking closely at the design of the armor, he continued. But wearing it does not give much protection in the middle. So? The chief did not comprehend the meaning of those words. He looked puzzled. There is a chance that the slain theocracy acted as the Empire's knights. Why would they? To worsen the relationship between the Empire and the kingdom. Probably. It's quite obvious. Ainz took a sweeping glance at Gazef but remained silent. Based on the body language, he wanted to say something. The village chief was deeply shocked by such a revelation. Then, Gazef began to speak in a serious tone. Anyway, the Death Knights that swept up the knights, that is Ainz Dono, how many do you have? This is the only one. Could you make another one if you had time? Yes. After hearing Ainz's answer, Gazef slowly closed his eyes. It was hard to discern the color of his pupils. After a few seconds elapsed, he opened his eyes again. I did not think much of it in the center of the village, but it would seem to be my misunderstanding. The expression underneath the mask did not change. But even so, if it is from the kingdom's strongest, then it is natural. Ainz smiled underneath his mask and spoke casually. Gazef looked at Ainz for a moment, then changed his view to the armor after losing his interest. Now, I apologize, but I would like to take this back with me. I do not mind if you are simply buying it. Ainz and Gazef exchanged sharp glances. Of course, because of the mask the assumption could be flawed. How much is it? This armor feels quite light. Magic was probably casted on it. And so the price increases. It's like that. The atmosphere was heavy. The chief was barely able to handle it and timidly observed both parties. Currently, I do not have much, a few days. Yes, Nazarick was it? Do you mind us bringing it there? That will be troublesome. Even if you come, there is a chance that I am not there. Then what about if we meet at the town? It is not bad, but... Ainz looked up at the sky, thought and opened his mouth. I have to return to Nazarick and prepare various things, and so I will have to refuse. Fumu, then what about payment in a different form? What sort of form? That is why I am asking you. The tension was building up. Between Ainz that wanted to sell it higher and Gazef who wanted the magical armor. There was a conflict of interest. Cold wind seems to blow. Then, what about this? Have a bout with my Death Knight. Wha? The chief shouted out in surprise. Gazef was silent as he took another drink of water. No, it was just to the extent of wetting his lips. The difference between my subordinate and the one known as the kingdom's strongest. I want to know it. But, Ainz don't know. Understood. The chief was anxious but he kept his lips shut. However, a voice, that sounded like he was burned, echoed throughout the room. WH. This time the one leaking a surprised voice was Ainz. After hearing that, Gazef shows a predatory smile. What is wrong, Ainz don't know. Were you just acting? You look surprised? No, but, I believe that Gazef Dono will not walk out unscathed. I do not mind. I will properly deliver my own to your subordinate. Ainz was surprised by Gazef's suggestion. Achieving a mutual agreement with this uncouth person was still possible. He might also want to investigate the extent of his strength. Based on this suggestion, Ainz himself might learn more. Hence, this is a good chance. The Death Knight was not an important pawn of Ainz. Comparing the time to summon another Death Knight and the price to learn about the strength of the kingdom's strongest, it was cheap. Under the gaze of both the warriors and the villagers, both combatants, the Death Knight and the warrior captain Gazef stood at the middle of the square facing each other. Then, as per our promise, no matter which side wins, or if any injuries arise from the fight, neither side can pursue the matter further. Ainz was appointed as the temporary referee. Many warriors voiced their opinion that they should handle it, but all of it was silenced by the warrior captain. Ainz took back the flamberge from the Death Knight, and replaced it with a broadsword that was loaned from one of the warriors. Seeing this, Gazef showed an expression that wanted to say something but he kept quiet at the end. Ainz noticed but ignored it. Matilda, whatever I say will just be another excuse. Now, both sides, please get ready. Is it fine to have this sort of atmosphere before the fight? Ainz seemed to sweat as he spoke to the two combatants. The Death Knight was armed with a tower shield and a broadsword, while Gazef was dual-wielding a pair of bastard swords. Gazef was in no way short, There was a difference in height by about 50 centimeters between the two. Just like a child and an adult. Just by looking at that, there seems to be an overwhelming difference in strength. Can Gazef win? That was on the mind in many of the onlookers. Death Knight. Instead of attacking, focus on defending. Then please begin. The Death Knight slowly advanced while performing a series of stabs with the sword. Gazef dodged the stabs effortlessly. This was the opening signal. The clash of swords started. A tempest and a river. Which was which? Their fight could be described as that. The swords gleamed. As they clashed, it was as if two beams of light were crossing each other. The swords from both sides contained traces of magical power which release magical sparks. The sound of metal clashing were constantly released from each strike. Some warriors were getting suspicious, while others were fearful, while others were stunned. It was that amazing. There was no way they could protect him. The fact that there was no hostility saved them. That sort of voice could be heard from among the warriors. They had never seen the fight of humanity's strongest. Now, they can spectate it with their own eyes. The warriors unconsciously clenched their fist. Even during training, they never truly saw the true extent of the warrior captain's strength. An upward slash. But the deflected sword came back once again at an angle that was aiming for the opponent's head. The Death Knight swung its head backwards and the sword only grazed the helm and the shoulder armor. The Death Knight possessed a special skill that allows the sword to bend like a whip. It blocked Gazef's sword and continued to slipping past the sword to swipe at Gazef's shoulder. It will be impossible to evade. Anyone would think that way. But he let go. Everyone was shocked. Gazef let go of his own swords. Before the Death Knight's sword reached his shoulders, Gazef caught the sword with both his palms. The scene was just like a sword dance. What will happen next? It was unimaginable. Gazef swung his sword and the Death Knight evaded. Next, the Death Knight swung its sword and Gazef evaded. Without leaving any room to breathe, the swords clashed again. If you called it a sword dance, everyone would agree. If it was practiced prior, this should be possible. He wanted to think that way. Dozens of strikes were exchanged but none hit the body. Between the two, who was the stronger one? Many of the warriors were getting alarmed. What are they doing now? They fainted 4 times? No, 5? The warriors tried to explain what they saw but they could not keep up with the moves. The villagers stopped thinking about anything after witnessing such a fight. The Death Knight's sword managed to cut Gazef's cape. Gazef bent his upper body to evade that strike. A few strands of hair danced in the air. The already short hair was further shortened. How close was Gazef to being hit? At that moment, it seemed to be the right time. Having barely avoiding the sword seemed to be a situation in Gazef's favor. This was as the sword was now swung too far, so even the Death Knight with its strong arm should not be able to return a sword that had performed an overcut to its original position. However, his opponent happened to be undead. If a normal person suddenly did that, then several muscles would easily tear. A backhand side slash. The sword that would have normally bisected a human cut through thin air. A gale blew past Gazef's head. Ducked. Did he already predict that? Gazef avoided it by squatting. Like that, Gazef's sword soared out the legs of the Death Knight, and stabbed. The Death Knight leapt. He instantly jumped backwards to avoid the sword. It was like a cat. It was both graceful and violent. Unweightless like elegance, it slowly landed on the ground. Gazef slowly stood up, and the Death Knight once again readied its sword. The late cheer echoed in the village square. Phoo! Gazef breathed heavily, and dashed with a bullet-like speed. A sword flashed. A volume that made you want to cover your ears. That sound occurred at the space between the tower shield and the bastard sword. The Death Knight's body received that, and lost its balance for just a moment. Ooh! Gazef swung his sword at the tower shield with a roar. The Death Knight drew back its tower shield in an irritated manner, and swung at Gazef. Gazef then jumped backwards in retreat. It was such a light movement that you would think that he was not wearing armor. The wind born from the impossibly fast movement of the tower shield created a cloud of dust in the surroundings. Matching it, the two broke into a dash. The sound of metal. The two figures within the dust cloud came out unharmed. Gazef was the first to retreat backwards. Was he blown back? Or was it his own decision? At this point in time, the surrounding spectators were simply protecting the silence. Already, hearts understood when this battle was at human limits. Ainz looked at the warriors that were about to take a breath and widen their eyes, and looking like they had forgotten something. The villagers had a gaze that showed that they did not understand much, except for the fact that they were watching something amazing. In the midst of the amazing match, only Ainz was examining it with cold eyes. His heart was wondering whether the opponent displayed his full strength. It will be perplexing if it is. He maintained his cool in contrast to the boisterous onlookers. Ignoring Ainz's inner thoughts, the swords continued clashing. The warriors and the villagers' faces reddened, and clenched their hands tightly. If they mistook the timing even slightly they would die. Somewhere in their brains could recognize this, and that probably would fail. There was something that they would never reach, a longing for the highest peak. The stiff sound of metal clashing rang, 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 rang. The speed of sword strikes from both sides had gone beyond the limit. The matching sounds sounded completely like one drawn-out sound. In the end, Gazef's sword slid and left a wound on the Death Knight's face. The thought that it was nothing but a lucky strike was in everyone's eyes. With a sword that scored a light hit due to luck. And then Ainz's voice echoed. "Let's stop there." The sounds of loud cheering erupted. It was a beautiful match. The band of warriors were celebrating their captain's victory. As expected of the kingdom's strongest, Gazef-sama. His breathing ragged and his face red, Gazef smiled at Ainz whose back is towards the crowd. Gazef showed a terrifying smile as he walked towards the unsurprised Ainz. "I wonder if you let me win, Ainz Dono?" Gazef took out his personal towel to wipe off his sweat. Killing intent leaked out from the gaps of the towel. No, it was not that complicated. Ainz took another step closer, and in a voice such that no one else could hear. "If I won, a lot of problems would arise." Ho! The atmosphere tensed. And Ainz took it calmly. Gazef wiped away his sweat, and placed the cloth in his pocket. "I will remember that. I left a set of armor in the Chief Dono's house. Please feel free to bring it back with you." Observing the back of the departing Gazef, Ainz smiled lightly. "At least I found out the strength of the strongest warrior in the kingdom." It might be known that he had bought the fight. However, it is likely that Gazef will report to the king. He was not the type of human that will prioritize his own emotions over intelligence gathering. He should be deeply loyal to the king. This was determined when Gazef was asked to remove his weapon earlier. He rejected the suggestion to remove the sword granted to him by the king. No matter how it looked, this transaction did not cost him. A very satisfied Ainz looked at the Death Knight. When the heck will he disappear? That was the question in his mind. Overlord First Half Chapter 14, Various Countries Part 1. Riesti's Kingdom, the royal capital. In the centermost of it was the large Rolent Castle. Surrounding it was a protective wall and every 800 meters, were 20 circular giant towers. There was Valentia Palace. Within the palace itself, there was a room built for beauty instead of practicality. A royal meeting was currently being held there. The contents of the meeting were unintelligent, and the words spoken were rather like unpractical dreams. "This time we defeated those people from the Empire, let us keep up the momentum and bring the fight to them. True, I had it with these constant harassments by the Empire. Looks like it's time to show our terror to those fools of the Empire." Well spoken. It is just as the Earl said. The laughter from these well-dressed men echoed around the room. Even when facing such a scene, the kingdom's warrior captain, Gazef, could not even show his worries. Gazef can only be exasperated by their speech and behavior. Since returning from Carney village, he intended to report the existence of the great magic caster, Ainz, to the king. But instead, he was dragged into a moment like this, a meeting that only served to increase his mental fatigue. The constant fatigue only served to increase his weariness. The fight between the Empire and the Kingdom will mostly result in the Kingdom suffering greater losses. The Kingdom mainly relied on conscripting villages to be soldiers, while the Empire trained a professional army on granting knighthood to deserving soldiers. From there, it is obvious who was the weak and who was the strong. The Kingdom's army were mostly simple peasants. Even though they had managed to hold the Empire at bay near the borders of the fortress city, the strength of the Kingdom was slowly reduced after each battle. The basic strategy of the Empire was to reduce the national strength of the Kingdom. This was by the high nobles, something that they could not understand. They only believed that their authority was everlasting. That magic caster should be caught and sent for interrogation. That region has been a part of the Kingdom for 100 years. How can we allow that magic caster to stay there? Please hold on a moment. Gazef spoke loudly to change the flow of the topic. Many of the nobles did not bother to hide their displeasure and showed a disgusted expression. Gazef relied on his swordsmanship to rise rank by rank to be the warrior captain. To the nobles with a long family history, Gazef was just a newbie and the nobles hated him. The hatred was intensified by Gazef's unrivaled skill and sword. The thought of letting a lowly peasant to sit equal with him nauseated them. I believe that Magic Caster displayed a friendly disposition to the kingdom. If we tried to treat him high-handedly, he could be a member of the Empire. It is important that we summon him to the capital and question him in detail. Furthermore, such a situation developed because the warrior captain believed the Magic Caster easily. After hearing Gazef's words, several nobles stood up against him. Many more agreed with them. That's correct. How can the warrior captain easily trust a suspicious masked man? After hearing this, how can we think that he is not suspicious? The so-called Magic Caster known as Ainz is unheard of. Even the well-established National Magic Research Institute does not have a record of him. His background is absolutely mysterious. It is likely that he is a human from the Empire. From this perspective, the warrior captain has to be responsible for letting such a person escape. Che. Enough. I do not think that the warrior captain's decision was wrong. Moo. If His Majesty has spoken. The king on the throne let out a sigh. The nobles accepted it and withdrew their mocking smiles at the warrior captain. Gazef raised his head and sent a look of gratitude to the figure that had his undying loyalty. The king accepted it and nodded lightly. The king of Riestai's kingdom. Lanpasa III. White hair, his body was not healthy and his face was sickly. The hand holding the royal scepter was as thin as a shriveled wig. The crown looks heavy on him. In power for 41 years. 62 years old. He was considered as some of the oldest in the country and should have abdicated the throne to a successor. Problem was that there was no suitable candidate. No, there was a prince. However, he was not someone that was talented and could only serve to become the puppet of the noble families. Your Highness, we hear and obey. However, we cannot leave such a suspicious magic caster unattended. But anyway, we should send someone to bring him to the kingdom forcefully and interrogate him. But that sorcerer has a servant that is stronger than me. Forcefully detaining him will most likely. Fun. Warrior Captain Bono. Is your arm getting rusty? Ma, it has been 4 years since the end of the tournament. Gazef clenched his fist to suppress himself. The opponents are the nobles, who wanted to infuriate him. 3 parts of the kingdom's territory was under the king's power, with the high nobles occupying another 3 parts. The remaining 4 parts were divided amongst the lesser nobles. By this structure was Riestai's kingdom formed. The high nobles were eyeing the king's authority. By suppressing Gazef, they aimed to reduce the king's authority. However, using that magic caster as a tool for power struggle is very dangerous. Underneath that mask, his identity was a mystery and he exerted an inhuman aura. If the mask was taken off, Gazef would not be surprised that the person was non-human. And that death night. What would have happened if the flamberge was not exchanged with the broadsword? That was still not a serious fight. If it went all out it could probably match Gazef. He also recalled that Ainz had nodded when he asked if more can be created over time. It was probably not simple to create an existence of that caliber, and it would probably be difficult to control multiple. Send the knights of my house, it should be easy to capture a mere magic caster. No, it should be my house. Why? Why they would be suspicious of a magic caster who helped a village to the extent that they want to detain him? Wouldn't it be better to invite him to the capital instead? He seemed like a sensible person. But it is unlikely that he would keep quiet from the treatment that he would receive. Gazef looked at his own hands. He still recalled the numbing sensation when he had received strikes from that corpse, the Death Knight. Please wait. Since it has been decided, please let me have the task of bringing him in. Hearing this, several of the nobles laughed. I believe this is not the job of the warrior captain? I agree, this action goes beyond your authority. Any more and we will consider it rude. True, it is just as he said. Absolutely rude. The nobles laughed again. The king showed a tired face. Warrior captain, it is regretful that I cannot let you perform this mission. It is likely when you are out, that another band of Empire Knights or other impostors might attack the villages. If so, please seek the help of adventurers to protect the village. Adventurers? Did you hear that, everyone? Yes, I heard it clearly too. The warrior captain is leaving the task of protecting the villagers to other people. Such an unbelievable speech. Ah. Let's just send a royal messenger. The meeting for today will be adjourned. Cacophony erupted, treating a nameless magic caster as an important person. The decision of the king was unacceptable to many nobles who openly showed their displeasure. However, they did not have the gall to openly oppose the king's decision, hence they could only hide their anger while bowing in acknowledgement. Gazef felt uneasy should the kingdom view Dines as an enemy. The power struggle stemming from every single royal conference greatly tired him. Using his last remaining strength, he moved in the direction of the king's room within the palace. He must advise the king not to underestimate nor treat the sorcerer, Ines, lightly. He saw the king's room. Standing next to it, soldiers were guarding it. The sentries remained emotionless, but no friendly emotions could be felt. It was likely they were the lackeys of one of the nobles. "I am here to request a meeting with the king. The princess has just entered the room. Then I shall wait in the hall. Please inform me when the king is ready to meet with me." "Understood." Under the escort of the sentry, Gazef arrived at the waiting hall. There, he saw someone that he expected. There stood a male at the border of teenagehood and adulthood. The impression he gave off was like a strong fire. He had sharp seppuku eyes and thick brows. His body used out his iron-like determination. Although he was expressionless, but one can see his seriousness in his sunburned face. The reason why he cut his hair short, was because it was convenient when moving, and so that it does not get in the way on the battlefield. His whole body was fitted with a set of magical armor that radiated a white glow. There are no decorations on the scabbard that held a magic enchanted sword. The form indicated a battle-ready stance. No matter what happens he would be ready for battle. The teenager sent a respectful look to Gazef and lowered his head. Gazef returned his salute with a slight bow. Time passed without a word between them. Gazef found it difficult to interact with him, but he does not hate him. Instead, he actually admired the youth. However, the atmosphere in the room is rather heavy. Both of them waited in silence until the sentry called them, -30 minutes afterwards. "You have waited long, Gazef-sama." "Ah. And, Climb-sama, please follow along too." "Understood." Following Gazef, a hoarse voice that did not match with the owner's appearance could be heard. To the boy, his voice was a thing of embarrassment, but to Gazef it was one worthy of pride. It was because he had practiced until he had broken his voice. With the sentry leading the way, the duo enters the king's room. Naturally Gazef was in front. "Pardon me." Gazef just entered the room and saw the king and another person. The figure of a beautiful woman. Renner Tayer Chardel and Ryle Vaself. She was the kingdom's third princess, who inherited the sparkling beauty of her mother, Renner. 17 years old. An adult, and an age where it would not be weird to be married. A point which the nobles constantly brought up. She was truly beautiful. No, the words beautiful could not describe her. It was to the extent that a painting could not capture her. Her long golden hair drifted behind her gorgeously. A smile flirted onto her pale but healthy pink flower-like lips. Her deep blue eyes were like sapphires. The detailed white dress really suited her, and a golden necklace dropped down from her neck. "Pardon me." A rough voice could be heard from behind Gazef. Renner's smile brightened further. "Climb." Renner spoke as she stood up. The escorting sentry left the room and returned to his station. Climb was a soldier that served Renner. His skills as a soldier can be considered as one of the best in the kingdom. Some sweets were placed on top of the table the king and princess were sitting at, and there were 2 porcelain cups with a bit of red tea left inside. They probably had a fun talk. Gazef felt remorseful for interrupting the king's relaxation time. He opened his mouth. "My king. I know this is about the magic caster." "Yes, Ines Dono is an exceptionally skilled magic caster. It is dangerous to take him lightly." "Of course I know that. A person having a servant that can fight on par with you is not to be underestimated." "Then." The king raised his hand to stop Gazef. "Please understand. Sending the royal messenger is the best compromise under these circumstances. To fight against the Empire's invasion, I need the strength of the noble faction. If I blatantly refuse them, the kingdom will fall apart without the Empire having to do anything." The Empire's target was the fortress city within the king's territory. Henceforth, the king required a large amount of military expenditure. The nobles of course would pay for part of it, but the amount paid is less compared to the amount that the king had to fork out. Trying to secure fundings from the nobles' faction though taxation was a dangerous move. It was expected that they would oppose the move strongly. It was likely that they would seek to replace him with the prince that would serve as their puppet. In fact, they were currently planning it. Because of the situation, Gazef could not say anything else. The subtlety of politics was not his strong point. The king's biggest compromise was to send a royal envoy? How I envy the empire. Hearing this, Gazef chose to remain quiet. Up to 3 generations ago, the empire was building itself. But, the authority of the nobles were reduced. The process sped up after the current emperor took the throne, creating a totalitarian country. The current emperor. Reminiscing the emperor's appearance in the battlefield. The figure of him that invited Gazef to be one of his subordinates. He was like a natural-born emperor. Is he that powerful, that magic caster? A voice as lovely as a crystal wind chime sounded out. Sitting next to the silent Climb was Princess Renner, who was listening to the conversation of the two at the side. Yes, his ability is beyond imagination. More powerful than the palace magic caster? Gazef recalled the figure of the royal magic caster. He himself can easily overwhelm him. However, he cannot picture himself overwhelming Ainz. Instead, a mental image of him being overpowered by Ainz came to mind easily. It is likely that a huge gap exists between them. Ma. Lenner's finger immediately grasped Climb's sleeve. It was probably an unconscious action, but Climb's expression hardened more than earlier, and became something like diamond. Kukuku. Seeing this, the king laughed. Gazef also let out a chuckle but stopped immediately. Climb is proficient in his sword skill. He always maintains a perfect form to protect the princess. It will not be a problem when it comes to Climb. He is one of my knights. Baseless words. But, the fact that they were spoken by the princess would bring it to attention. Since it has been decided as such, Atasama, why don't we send an extra person to go together with the royal envoy? Gazef and the king exchanged glances. Climb, what would you do? Climb opened his mouth and then firmly closed it. Climb? After being asked another time, Climb gave up and responded. Some blood appeared from the previously clenched lips. A messenger that is ranked higher than the royal envoy. If it is our intention to let the other party know that the royal family holds him in high regards, sending a member of the royal family is more effective. But looking at the current situation, there is a possibility that it is a sole decision made by someone seeking to undermine the king's orders. Yes. It was just so. The ambassador with the highest authority is someone within the royal family, and it was someone with a direct line to the throne. Within the kingdom, the only person in the royal family that was the most suited as an envoy was Princess Renner. The Golden Renner. There is another reason for her name. She has proposed many ideas and new laws that were highly effective, and her personality was sparkling. Many of her suggestions were primarily for improving the status of the civilians. However, it was not through directly helping them, but through providing ideas and option to them instead. This did not only improve the living condition of the civilian but also raise their loyalty towards the royal family, and at the same time, increase their productivity. However, most of the plans did not come into fruition as the nobles who did not want to see an improvement in civilian status disrupted those plans. Renner did this not only out of kindness alone but also seek to improve the country's benefit. Only she can take on the role as a royal ambassador. However, the king had already decided to send a royal envoy. Renner's suggestion went against the royal decree. The king cannot show his weakness in front of the nobles. Hence a situation where the ambassador going against the king was not allowed to happen. If the king was strong, he might have been able to protect a messenger. However, the current noble faction was stronger, and so he was unable to do so. They may also think of dealing a punishment. If Renner was used, the nobles may use her for whatever purpose they deem suitable. Climb understood the situation. Who knows how the nobles will use Renner? I cannot do that. The king's voice was sharp like a sword. Hearing this, Renner bowed. Climb also bowed deeply. I have spoken too much. Please forgive me, father. I still have things to discuss with the warrior captain. You two please leave. Yes, father. Renner pulled the expressionless Climb out. Seeing the two of them forgetting the royal manners, the king smiled at them. In fact, he was smiling at them with a smile that he had lost long ago. After the two left, the king's expression changed. As a king, I should not feel pity about this. Climb's status was lower than Gazef. To be more precise, he was a peasant of unknown birth. He was someone picked up by Renner in the city. Then, he was small, thin and dying. Now, to protect his savior, he had worked hard. No, the words worked hard were not enough to describe it. He did not have talent in the sword or magic. His physical strength was not exceptional as well. However, he still overcame his weaknesses with his own effort. For those humans that are born with talent, and those not, there is an impenetrable wall. However, that can be crossed. Climb was a good example. But there are things that cannot be surpassed. Status, and authority. And worth. A princess such as Renner would be worth a lot. Such to the extent that Climb could never reach. My sympathies. Ah. Earl Lytton has been noisy. The princess, is that so? Yes. The king stared into space. It was like he was looking at someone there. Only saying the right things is a bother. In the end, I should not make my daughter unhappy. Gazef was not able to say anything on this matter. Only someone with the same standing as the king can understand his pains. That was not Gazef. The two remained silent, and time slowly passed. Overlord First Half Chapter 15, Various Countries Part 2. There were the words splendid. If one was asked what would be the physical embodiment of the word, this room would be the best fit. The softness of the red carpet spread out on the floor made it feel that you were sinking up to your ankles. The countless furnishings placed around the room were the embodiment of the word splendid. In the middle was a sofa made for two people, and high-class wood had the French Rococo style engraved on it, and black genuine leather was covering the seat, and gave off a slight luster. On that sofa was one man who was spread out his feet, and hung it on the sofa. Handsome. There were no other words that could describe that person better. His figure had no faults. His silver hair seemed to reflect the light of magic, and shimmered like the stars. His long slit purple eyes held an intense color. And more than his appearance was his atmosphere. It was something that could only be born if the owner was of a high rank of absolute dominance. He was Jai-Arsien of Rune Farlord Elnix. Age 22, the emperor of the Baharuth Empire, enticing fear from the nobles and respect from the people, the most successful emperor. Excluding the young man, there were the figures of 4 other men in the room, and none of them were sitting. With ramrod straight figures, they could have been mistaken for statues. When lower-ranked people were taking care of the uppermost position, that was the correct posture. Attendants. Everyone had their limbs wrapped in flexible and slender steel, luxurious, but not flashy. They looked young. In the first half of their 20s. However, how much training did they go through? Their hands had hardened, and the grip of their swords seemed to have their hands imprinted on it. Jai-Arsienev let his eyes leave the parchment for a little, and fixed his gaze into empty air. He also had a blackboard, and wrote his thoughts down. Then, that village girl? Ha! While standing at attention, one of the attendants opened his mouth. A quiet but heavy voice rang. She seems to have just left. HMP, Jai-Arsienev snorted. It was a snort with elements of mocking and interest. And so then he threw it on the ground, and a woman picked it up and read it. And once again his eyes turned hollow. The silence went on for a little while, and the early attendant could not bear it, opened his mouth. Should we investigate? Fine. Jai-Arsienev threw out a word. His hollow gaze did not move from its location. A rounded hand was raised, and bit his lip such that it was hidden. Those purple eyes flashed while being filled with various feelings. And then his lip rose. Isn't it interesting? What conclusion was born in Jai-Arsienev? A small and quiet laugh could be heard. The attendants did not react. The emperor thinks and floats the paper in the air, and wrote down several of his thoughts, and chose. The entourage of the attendants knew that he hated it if you interrupted him. At that time, the door opened without knocking. At that discourteous conduct, the attendants simultaneously lowered their hips and sent hostility towards the opening door. However, the attendants confirmed the identity of the person entering, and in a similar manner simultaneously stood back at attention. The one entering had a long beard that was half of his height and was an old man with a head full of white hair. His hair and snow were both white, but was not as thin. His wrinkled face was due to age, and his eyes held a wealth of knowledge. A necklace of several crystal balls hung down from his neck, and many rings decorated his fingers. A comfortable pure white robe drooped his body and looked to be made of a soft cloth. When the old man entered, the room was filled with the blue smell of herbs. How troublesome! The old man entered the room slowly, and opened his mouth. The voice that came out was an unsuitably young-sounding voice that spit out those words. Jai-Arsienev's face, which was filled with interest, did not move his mouth but instead instructed with his eyeballs. What's wrong, G? I have investigated, But many of my foolish disciples had their minds shocked, and it was probably due to some obstructions, and so we ended it there. Basically, what does it mean? My dear Emperor. The reason why magic exists in this world. In order to master knowledge. Ah, I know. I know. Jircnf shook his hands in disinterest. Your explanations are long. Get straight to the point. I estimate that his ability is about equal to mine. Or possibly even more powerful. Excluding the Emperor and the old man, a feeling of panic was born in the room. The most powerful magic caster in the history of the Empire. They could not believe their eyes that there was an existence that could rival the chief court magician, the great sage Fluter Paradine. I see. You seem happy, G. Of course. Someone the same as me, or possibly a more powerful magic caster. I have not met one since 200 years ago. You met one 200 years ago? The Emperor's voice was full of curiosity, and the chief court magician's gaze turned towards a distant memory. That's true. The legendary 13 heroes. One of them, the necromancer Rigret Bellis Carla. A benevolent person. There were other magic casters that were good. The remaining 4 were a dark mage, a magic swordsman, a cleric and a priest. Then what about now? Fluter's eyes looked far into the distance. Unclear. I feel like it is about half. Contrary to the words that were spun while stroking a long beard, the feelings conceived a sense of confidence. Jircnf noticed this and had a wry smile, and selected a scroll among several from his sofa, and threw it to his feet. Read. One of the followers went forward and picked it up. This is information from the kingdom. The face of the attendant who was reading it sharpened. From an image on the blackboard in the air, Jircnf drew out the contents. The warrior captain seemed to have had a battle with the magic caster's servant. His following words shocked everyone standing there. And it seems that he had victory given to him. The air shook. The warrior captain Gazef was the most well-known person of the kingdom in the empire. His sword arm was of a degree such that he could fight the several people from the empire equally. There is no one who can beat him. And to give him victory. They had to suppress the surprise of the fact that there was an existence that had a subordinate that could beat him from showing on their faces. And it is an undead servant. Ho! It was the first time that Fluter had his interest piqued and he made a sound. It was considerably difficult to have control over a corpse. In the case of using magic to investigate, the opponent would be thought of a powerful magic caster. None of the attendants could not remember Jircnf and Fluter's earlier words. Now about the legendary 13 heroes. Did the necromancer Rigret Bellis Carla have undead familiars that could rival the strength of a man like Gazef? G. Now. According to legend, creating a powerful existence, and controlling it, its credibility is unclear. When I met her she did not bring any high-class undead. Then what about G, can you control such an undead? The difficulty of control to summon or create such strong beings like undead and demons, depends on the strength of the creature. From what I have heard of Gazef Dono, a undead of around his strength, one would be easy. As expected, to the words of the man stroking his beard, the surrounding attendants had a sense of admiration. Then the second would be difficult? Fumu, this is quite a difficult decision. If you can add in measures via magic, you might be able to control many. This is as after the second body, the degree of difficulty increases. That person, Rigret Dono, was extremely good at that. She could summon and control 20 ghasts at the same time, something impossible even for a high-class magic caster. Like he was developing a method, Fluter continued. It is not unusual to make secret the magic theory and magic forms that one has made, and pass it down their generation. Fluter himself, if he gets the magic theory of Rigret's, he might be able to control the same undead. Regrettably, controlling 10 ghasts at the same time is his limit. Basically even G can't do it. Einzulgon, could he be one of the 13 heroes? No one held a reply. Fluter only moved his eyebrows. Fufu. Isn't it interesting? So, you have probably been aware of the place called Nazarick. Ha! One of the attendants took one step forward. It has already been investigated. What sort of place is it? Yes. The place known as the underground tomb of Nazarick, is in the middle of plains and is in a 300-meter wide square. And it is surrounded by 4-meter walls. They seem quite tough. When we peeped through a lattice gate, it seems to be a graveyard. We are currently in the middle of investigating from which period it appeared, and information from the intelligence agency has not been received, so I cannot report more than this. Jyrcnv jerked his chin in a manner to indicate him to continue, and another attendant took a step forward. Several knights are currently in the middle of preparations for a search team.
Fine.
Do not do anything that would gain their hostility.
My apologies.
G. Can you collect information using magic such that the opponent does not find out? Assume that he is a high-class magic caster. It should be impossible.
Really?
Fluter was overwhelmed by the sudden words, but the silence emanating from Jyrcnv was cut when he opened his mouth. It is true that there are existences known as adventurers.
Yes.
I believe that they also exist in the Empire. The attendant made a perplexed face as he replied. Send the highest-class adventurers to the underground tomb of Nezarec to investigate. Naturally, do not let on that the Empire is involved. If it is unknown information, Einzulgo and the magic caster too should not be able to gain it.
Understood.
Also, kick the butts of the intelligence agency. G. Help with those who ask too much with your magic. Several will die. So? Towards the Emperor that had a weird expression on his face, Fluter lowered his head.
Understood.
Now, we're getting busy. Jyrcnv snapped his hand. And had a complacent smile. From now on we can exterminate the kingdom. The slain theocracy revered 6 gods. This religion differed from the surrounding countries. The religion the surrounding countries believe in are the 4 elemental gods. They were earth, water, fire, and wind. There were respective gods that created and governed the world. And then there were smaller gods that dotted the surroundings. In comparison, the slain theocracy had additional gods, and ones even higher, the gods of light, life and darkness, death. In the beginning there was light and darkness, and from them the 4 great gods were born. And so, not praying to the gods of life and death and instead praying to the gods below them as the most powerful, and so they had a very bad affinity to the religion of the 4 great gods. Religious difference has always been an underlying quarrel in any world. However, the relations between the surrounding areas and the slain theocracy was not that bad. Even a straight-on battle had not happened for tens of years. If you want the simple reason, it can be expressed succinctly. There was a difference in base military power. The theocracy's power was strong in the middle of the surrounding countries. And there was a certain which more than anything that had an implication, and agreed that they were strong. Conversely, if they wanted to invade other countries, it was because it would be due to a situation where since the religions were different, and so could surround them. There was another reason why the theocracy was like a board. And basically the theocracy did not recognize other groups besides humans. This was an extremely deep-rooted thought born from religion. And so depending on the other non-human groups, the neighboring elf kingdom, the demi-human legislation and the dwarf kingdom occasionally caused problems for them. More than any reasons, the theocracy was a country where humans ruled and without a basic enemy, and their next goal was to finish the suppression of the demi-humans, but those things were happening under the surface. In that theocracy, it was not that small, but not to the extent where you could call it large. It was a weird size for a room. While not letting sounds from this room escape, it was somehow properly ventilated. This was an extremely high-class room, and so it was natural that those who had permission to use it were humans in extremely high positions. There were several men. 3 priests were clad in white robes with golden embellishments. The priests clad in black robes with silver embellishments numbered 2. The number of men clad in red robes and had a magic sword hanging from their waists numbered 2. The clothes that the men were wearing were plain, but in no way were they of poor quality. No, it should be said that for such a simple thing, they were prepared quite delicately. The first priests clad in white were those who believed strongly in the god of life, Allah Alaf. And in opposition, the priests clad in black worshipped the god of death, Sulshana. And lastly was the commander of the theocracy's religious armed forces, clad in a priest robe. He was in a position similar to that of other countries' corps commanders. In the middle of the room was a table. On it was a giant sheepskin parchment with something drawn on it. It was something that everyone in the theocracy knew about. The god of death, Sulshana. Giving eternal rest to those with life, the god that gave an everlasting despair. Written in the scriptures as stronger than both the god of life and the other 4 gods, as humans could not escape the scythe of death. And that was more than life, a god that absolutely exists. The god that can control fear, death and disease. Normally he would be considered an evil god. Most of the smaller gods he had as subordinates would be quite wicked. But, weirdly he fell to the earth, and was not a god that would freely spread vice. If anything, it was more like the smaller gods belonged to other gods. The reason why the people of this country worship this god, which could be called an evil god, was as to beg him to not bring down his power of vice on them. And then the image of this god being the problem, was the reason why several people had assembled in this room. Then, we are still saying that it is like this? Yes. However, you only saw one person, right? The number is not the problem. The problem is, what is this person? It is just as you say, but... The men clad in priest robes exchanged their various opinions. As they believed in the same religion, the discussion continued smoothly. One did not look for the ideas from an individual, but instead got them from the entire group. And so, to get unified contents, the need to search for everyone's ideas with good questions was recognized by everyone. And time passed. One thing seemed to have been decided. The meeting, which had reached its climax, had returned back to its original calm state. There is no need to panic. There is a chance that he has adopted a figure similar to that of our god to confuse us. The possibility is high. What a terrible guy. Then we don't mind the first thing we do being collecting information. I do not mind. Everyone's head nodded simultaneously. Sending agents into the area around the fort city. Don't be stupid. We can't leave any traces behind. Then a retreat should be ordered. However, the Empire should have grasped this movement? Then it is not bad to continue to cause more commotions, isn't it? Then only one part of the kingdom. No, if done poorly, there is a chance that information collection would not go as well. The Empire's information agency and our intelligence bureau have already faced one another in the kingdom. Any more and it will be rude to our intelligence bureau. Should we request to cooperate with the Mycos of the astrology and oracle bureaus? Not bad, but only our problems would disappear. More or less it might be over the top. Fumu. Then first it will be necessary to make some temporary decisions regarding this job. Then, I will. Once again they began to combine details. The painting of Solshano was left on the tabletop. The avatar of death was drawn with a skull as a base. And a figure with very little skin stuck to it. Its jet black robe was like a large body of darkness, and held a sparkling staff in its hand. That was the figure of the strongest god that everyone in the theocracy knew. By the time the various countries had made their move, Ainz had already left the village for 50 days. Let us return to the present, and continue the story. As it had rained the previous day, the road the man was walking on made a splashing sound. As there were not many stone pavements in this town, if it rained, the ground would turn muddy, various places would have puddles. The man avoided the puddles, and silently walked along the road. Every time he stepped over a puddle, the dirty sack on his back would jump slightly, and a sound of metal could be heard. Passing through the front of several stores, the man stopped in front of store with quite a large structure. The man climbed the multiple steps lining the front of the store, and pushed open the door that was made of wood. Being the guild's receptionist meant that one had some free time. Dangerous occasions often happened. But up until now, none have occurred. Lastly, saying so, the guild's receptionist, Ishpan Blue, suppressed a yawn while sitting at the counter, staring into space. Free time. There were no new requests. There were also no adventurers. She had finished organizing the request book 2 hours ago. Leaving her seat was the same as quitting her job. There was no way she would do so. She also had just went to the toilet 30 minutes ago. To comfort herself, she read the sheepskin parchment spread out on the counter. She had already read this 6 times, and had most of it memorized. Lined up behind her seat, were shelves of books. Her brain was wondering whether should she kill some time by reading the adventurer records, or should she do something else. At the peak of her boredom, the door creaked, and slowly opened. There was a difference in the intensity of light between the inside and outside, and so Ishpan's eyes narrowed. On the contrary, one man stepped into the guild. The man slowly raised his frayed hood. And then he removed the dirty sack from his back. While it was unclear what was inside, the sack rattled. When he removed it, a metal sound had made its way to Ishpan. 20 points. Her heart spoke. To become her lover, something about 60 would not be enough. This was out of 100 points. There was a man who could not be described as anything but slightly below average. A medium build. Looks were third, maybe fourth rate. Black hair and eyes. He seemed to have just entered his 20s. The clothes he was wearing was also not of a good quality. They were like the uncouth cotton clothes that villagers wore. It was something far from what the typical adventurer wore. His leather soles were dirtied with mud, and reminded her of yesterday's rain. A request? Or maybe an application to be an adventurer? But, the quietly observing Ishpin slightly widened her eyes. The man's chest had a slight silver glow. And every time his body moved, there was a sound that would remind one of chains. That was proof that he was wearing chainmail. And the sword hanging from his waist, the broadsword, was a good item. Magic might have even been casted on it. And so he gave off the air of a merchant. "Welcome, to the Adventurers Guild." The man's gaze met Ishpin, who had on her business smile, and said the usual greeting. He had probably noticed Ishpin. He closed the distance, and stood in front of Ishpin. The commonplace stench of the countryside, the smell of animals or manure, was not there. He was unexpectedly clean. Plus 5 points. While thinking that, Ishpin gazed at the man. He was not well built. And his sword did not seem that special. "I have come here to become an adventurer." "Yes. You can perform that here." Ishpin smiled. It was not rare. The story where a commoner picked up a sword and armor on the battlefield, and aimed for the rank of an adventurer, was quite common. The job of an adventurer with money and fame from swinging a sword to kill monsters from the perspective of an average villager. And it would put a dull life to an end and replace it with a life of adventure. Firstly, to enter the guild, a payment of 5 silver coins is needed. Will that be fine? There is no problem. The man fished in his pockets, and took out a small leather pouch. Putting his hand inside, he took out 5 silver coins and placed them on the counter. Ishpin took one and looked at the faces. Slightly scratched, but the imprint of a wheel was properly engraved on it. Then there was no problem. "Yes, payment has been confirmed. Then firstly we have to write quite a bit. Would you like me to write for you? Or would you prefer to write for yourself? If you would like me to, it will cost an additional 5 copper coins." "Please write for me." The man once again placed a silver coin on the table. This too was not rare. Most of the people who could read and write in the kingdom with a less than 50% literacy rate were nobles and intellectuals. Ishpin returned 5 coppers to the man, dipped the feathered quill in ink and spread out a sheepskin parchment. "Then could you inform me of your name so that I can record it?" "That is right." The man stopped and looked up into empty air and spoke. It was a weird scene, but Ishpin did not really think much. When one became an adventurer, it was not rare for people to hide their names. No matter what name they changed to, as long as they worked as a proper adventurer, then there was no problem. Of course, stuff like wanted lists and police bulletins would be examined. But talking out loud would be bad. And slightly scary. The man finally decided on a name, and opened his mouth. "Then, please call me Moman."